Will Hobhouse.
Number one, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tackling violence against women and girls remains one of the government's top priorities, and we're doing all we can to make streets and homes safer. We're prioritising prevention, supporting survivors and strengthening our pursuit of aggressors.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is a well-known national scandal that only 3% of rape cases have led to charges against the perpetrator. Locally, Avon and Somerset Police are making big strides towards change. They have tripled charge rates, bringing more cases to the CPS, and have changed their investigative focus from the victim to the perpetrator. I'm immensely proud of this progress and hope that my local area could become part of the ongoing pilot for specialist rape courts. Can the Minister confirm when a decision on the further rollout of specialist rape courts will be made, and will my local Crown Court be considered to be part of the next stages?
Evidence is being gathered from our 3 specialist courts, but I should emphasise that every Crown Court tries rape cases and will benefit from the learning. The South West, as the Honourable Lady has outlined, is really showing the way by demonstrating new ways of working with the police, providing specialist training to all first responders. They're also, I hear, planning a community event later this month.
Prosecution rates for the appalling crime of rape against women and girls have been too low across the country. What impact does my right honourable friend believe that Operation Soteria will have on prosecuting cases of rape?
I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. She's always a great advocate for vulnerable people. Operation Soteria is focused on delivering cultural transformation in the investigation of rape offences. It looks to ensure that the victim is really well supported and the case thoroughly investigated. I was glad to see joint working between the police and CPS when I visited Leeds last Friday. They're working closely together and crucially with support services such as ISFAs to make sure we really deliver for victims.
Mr. Speaker, a most recent revelation in Northern Ireland is that a man was punished with 140 hours of community service after domestically assaulting his wife on 2 different occasions. What steps will the Attorney-General take to ensure that harsher sentences are given to those guilty of inflicting violence on women? We need harsher sentences, Minister. Thank you.
I thank the honourable gentleman for raising that important case. Of course, sentencing is a matter for the independent judiciary and, of course, for the Ministry of Justice and the Sentencing Council. But I know that he shares our desire in government to do all we can to make sure that the victims of violence against women and girls get justice.
Sir Oliver Hill.
Will the Attorney agree with me that the Crown Prosecution Service are very dependent on the quality of the investigation from the outset? And can I therefore welcome this joint working, which is something that had been hoped for over many years and seems to be delivering results? And I don't know if she'd anything she can say about the rollout of this to the country as a whole.
I thank my learned friend for his question. I know that this is something that he has personally been working on for many years. It is true to say, I think, that joint working is the answer. And in Leeds on Friday, I was able to see a police gatekeeper, he's called, but I think a better word would be interpreter, who was able to work between the lawyers and the victim and witnesses and really ensure that the case was investigated properly right from the beginning and that disclosure was managed in a sensible way.
Question number 2, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, all victims of crime deserve the right support, and the CPS has published the findings of independent research and is implementing changes based on this to deliver what victims need. And there is new and innovative victim communication for half of CPS areas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Justice delayed is justice denied. But as of September 2022, there were more than 17,300 Crown Court cases that have been outstanding for a year or more, and nearly 5,000 outstanding for over 2 years. What does the Attorney-General have to say to the victims of those crimes whose lives have been put on hold for years while waiting for their cases to be brought to justice? And to those who cannot cope with any more delay, even if that means allowing their cases to collapse?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman raises an important point, and the Attorney-General and I are working very closely with the Ministry of Justice. Of course, in terms of the CPS and the time that takes for cases to be heard, there have been good progress in that regard, and the most recent figures show that 171 days on average that the CPS has, and I'm determined to see that improve and increase.
Drummond.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Victims of crime have already been through distressing circumstances. So can my honourable friend tell me what the CPS is doing to inform and support people to navigate the criminal justice system?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm grateful to my honourable friend for her interest in this important area. And the CPS has launched a new online guide for victims, which ensures that they have access to the necessary information. As my honourable friend hinted at, she is right. Accessible information is the key to supporting victims and ensure that they can navigate the criminal justice system.
Turner.
The Attorney will be aware that victims of crime are being badly let down, waiting months and years for their cases to come to court. But the problem is being exacerbated by the fact that there's now a disparity between criminal defence barristers' pay and prosecution barristers. What does the Attorney intend to do to right that wrong and put victims first?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman is right to say that we should be putting victims first, and indeed we are doing so. On the specific question that he raises, the Treasury has agreed to consider the CPS funding position following the publication of the Criminal Legal Aid Independent Review, which is a report that he will know about. Discussions regarding fees and funding are ongoing, but I fully support him in putting victims first and ensuring that these cases are brought on as quickly as possible.
Gillis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I put on the record my thanks to the Solicitor General for his compassion and care when dealing with the very tragic case of Charlotte Skye, who lost her life along Endon Road in Norton Green. He will know that Claire, and Charlotte's mother, has felt failed because ultimately it took over a year to get simple answers from a blood test as to whether, in this case, someone had been drinking and on drugs. What engagement has the Solicitor General had with the DFT about their review to speed up answers for our police officers and, most importantly, speed up answers for victims of this horrific crime?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and may I pay tribute to my honourable friend who has diligently and vigorously pursued his constituent's case. I well remember the adjournment debate that he brought to this House and the important points that he raised concerning the unduly lenient sentence scheme. In terms of working closely across government, that is something that I am determined to do, and I know my honourable friend will pursue and continue with his campaign.
Number 3, Mr. Speaker.
I would like to thank the House of Lords Committee for their thoughtful and detailed report, which highlights the complexity of this historic office. It's an honour to serve to make law and politics work together at the heart of government.
Mr. Speaker, the Constitution Committee rightly says that we need law officers, and I quote, with the independence of mind, autonomy and strength of character to deliver impartial legal advice to the government, even where it's unwelcome. I'm sure the Attorney-General agrees with that. But can she give a single example of where her predecessor met that standard in the advice that she gave to the government?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question, but he knows, and we all know, I think, that the Attorney-General's Convention means that I don't comment specifically on the advice that has been given by any holder of this office, or even on whether or not advice was given. Seriously, and I think this is a serious matter, I think the report highlights some very important points on how the law officers work in combination as politicians and as lawyers. That is something that I take extremely seriously myself. I know that I have duties to the court as well as duties to my constituent and to the government, and I think it's very important that we treat this with the seriousness it deserves.
Chair of the Select Committee, Sir Robert Neal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the Attorney has just demonstrated that she and the solicitor are well up to the task. Might I just say that in welcoming the report, as she also does, would she also recognise that in stressing the importance of the attorney as the person who speaks truth to power to government, it's important to recognise also that the attorney must therefore, and the law officers must also be consulted in timely fashion and appropriately and fully on any controversial matters which may have a legal aspect, and that government and fellow ministers should then listen and act accordingly consistently.
I thank the honourable gentleman, very learned gentleman, on whose committee I was extremely proud to sit for many years, for his question, which I think was more of a statement, Mr. Speaker. And I think it's important to note that the government's commitment to the rule of law is absolute, and I will do my very best to uphold that.
Secretary Attorney-General Emily Thornburn.
Very much. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And may I join the Attorney by thanking the Constitution Committee for this excellent report, which I have to say is a damning indictment of the former Attorney-General, but also a helpful warning for current and future holders of the post. Can I ask the Attorney-General about one specific point in relation to the report, though? Does she agree that it would be helpful to provide greater clarity within the ministerial code on the duties of law officers, particularly when it comes to upholding the rule of law within government and providing impartial legal advice, regardless of political considerations, both areas that the former Attorney-General fell so drastically short on?
I have looked often at the ministerial code, and I think the section that deals with legal advice is sufficient. I notice, to go back to the previous question, that it is suggested that the advice sought should be timely, but of course all lawyers who are present in this chamber knows that that is not always the way with clients, and we do our best to accommodate them. On some things, however, we can clearly be less accommodating, however, and the rule of law is an absolute thread which runs through the legal advice that is provided by the holders of this office.
Emily Thornburn.
Thank the Attorney-General for that answer. Can I ask about one specific area of the ministerial code that might benefit from particular clarity? And that's Section 7, which requires ministers to inform law officers if they risk becoming involved in legal proceedings in a personal capacity, including when they are potential defendants or in relation to potential defamation cases, and preferably before they have instructed their own solicitors. On that basis, I ask the Attorney-General to clarify 2 points of fact. Are ministers currently obliged to inform law officers either if their solicitors are sending letters to journalists threatening to sue them for libel, or if they are under investigation by HMRC over the non-payment of taxes?
I'm not going to comment on specific cases, and the Honourable Lady will understand why that is the case. I think the ministerial code allows for a certain level of wriggle room on that particular area. It is clear that when proceedings are already commenced, that it is essential to ask the law officer's opinion on those proceedings, but I think she and I both know that it is not always clear at the beginning of a series of letters which may or may not lead to proceedings when that moment should be. I would always caution, as I'm sure she would, that it would be good to involve the law officers at an early stage of proceedings, but I can't comment on specific cases and whether or not that was done.
Robert Court.
Number 4, Mr. Speaker.
I thank my neighbour for his question. This government firmly believes in international accountability. Ukraine's judiciary should be congratulated for prosecuting war crimes right now, in real time, during a very brutal conflict. On Monday, I met a delegation of Ukrainian judges in this building and heard how they are approaching this monumental task. They're very grateful for our practical support, including an extensive training programme led by Sir Howard Morrison.
Robert Court.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Attorney-General for that question. I mean, what assessments has she made of the international community's progress in bringing Russian leadership to trial for the crime of aggression in Ukraine?
The crime of aggression is one of the most significant in international criminal law. At the invitation of Ukraine, we have joined a core group of states to discuss the establishment of a bespoke tribunal. We are absolutely determined to play a leading role in ensuring international accountability for Russia's actions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will there be Russian war reparations to Ukraine? And how can the UK support that?
At the moment, the international community is rightly focused on prosecution for war crimes. I think that is the right focus because we hope that we will, by so doing, have a good effect on the behaviour of those fighting this conflict at the moment. We undoubtedly are starting to turn our minds to reparations, and there is a great deal of work going on within government and as to how we best support the Ukrainians to do that. I know that the Secretary of State for Bays is very involved in this.
Shadow Minister Andy Slaughter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 3 weeks ago, the Secretary of State for Justice told me from the dispatch box that Russian war crimes would be pursued via Ukrainian domestic courts and the International Criminal Court, even though that denied the possibility of prosecuting Putin and his inner circle for the crime of aggression. And at the time, the Attorney General appeared to share his view. Last week, the Foreign Office welcomed the special tribunal necessary to try Putin, saying it would complement the established mechanism. That's welcome, and I think that's what the Attorney said today. But can she, because we know her to be a candid and thoughtful person, explain and confirm what by any definition is a screeching U-turn in government policy?
Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid I really would not describe this as a screeching U-turn. This is no, not at all. This is a development of a very, very difficult area of international law. I would just listen to me for a moment. This is a very delicate area of international law. This is a live and brutal conflict. We are all agreed on that. It is right that most of the prosecutions take place in Ukraine with real-time evidence, with witnesses present, and those prosecutions are going well, and I think we all support the Ukrainian judiciary in doing that. I hope very much that there will be an international moment of accountability following this war. I suspect that many courts will need to be involved, both the ICC and any special tribunal.
We now come to SNP spokesperson Angela Crowley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is 1 year today since the beginning of Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, and an estimated 7,000 civilian lives have been lost during this time. One of the most barbaric atrocities recorded of civilians since the Second World War. Given the UK will host a major international meeting on war crimes in March, what further support would you give on information sharing, testimonial gatherings, and ensuring legal expertise will be fully utilised to hold Russian war criminals to account?
I thank the Honourable Lady for his question. It's fortuitous that the Lord Chancellor has just entered the chamber because he is hosting an important conference with the Dutch in March to discuss how further we can help and support the work of the ICC. We further have the work of the Special Tribunal, which I mentioned, and we are providing a great deal of practical help on the ground, training Ukrainian judges and providing funding to help them to find evidence and to prosecute these crimes effectively.
Edward Tibbs.
Speaker, question 5.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to group questions 5 and 6 together, and I'd first like to pay tribute to my honourable friend and his work as Solicitor General, and from that work he will know the significant amount of funding in the criminal justice system to help improve the waiting times for victims, and both the Attorney and I have seen that firsthand in our visits to regional CPS areas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Solicitor for his answer, and further to the point raised by the Honourable Gentleman for Kingston upon Hull East. In the first 3 quarters of 2022, there have been 235 ineffective Crown Court trials caused by prosecution absence, the highest annual total since 2014, and compared with just 19 in 2019. The recent uplift to defence fees has meant that there's now more money in defending and prosecuting, and consequently the CPS is struggling to find enough prosecutors for trials. So what timescales is my honourable and learned friend working towards in order to try and address this situation?
Mr. Speaker, I am grateful to my honourable friend for raising this point. And of course I recognise the importance of ensuring that all those who work in the criminal justice system, both defence and prosecution, are paid and rewarded appropriately. He will have heard my answer earlier on. It is right that the Treasury has agreed to consider the CPS funding position. Discussions are ongoing, and I know my honourable friend will keep pressing.
Rob Mayo. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The police are doing an excellent job in Broadland. They've just opened a new response centre at Posit, improving response times and housing some of the many additional officers that this government has provided. The CPS is the next line in the criminal justice journey. The CPS Inspectorate undertook a report on local provision in March 2022. Can my honourable and learned friend provide an update to the House on the performance since that date?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, and I recognise his expertise and interest in this area as well. The inspection report for the East of England praised the quality of the work done within the area, and the latest data suggests performance continues to be strong. The area is now making all crime charging decisions quicker than it was previously, and he will be pleased to know that in the face of the backlog, the conviction rate for his region, for the CPS, remains reassuringly high at 85%.
Elaine Colburn. 7, Mr. Speaker.
We're committed to upping the volumes of prosecutions and supporting more victims. That's why we enacted new provisions to increase the time victims have to report domestic abuse offences to ensure that we can bring more offenders to justice.
Elaine Colburn. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Despite being a relatively safe part of London, domestic violence rates in Carshalton and Wallington are bigger than the London average. Now, local charities like the Sutton Women's Centre do a great job in training people to spot the signs, but what assurance can the Attorney General give me that CPS staff also get access to that same training to bring this level of crime down?
I'd like to thank the Sutton Women's Centre for the fantastic work that they do, training the community to spot the signs of domestic abuse. All prosecutors in London are now domestic abuse trained, and close working with the police should really continue to increase the rate of prosecutions.
Aaron Bell.
Mr. Speaker, you may remember that the SFO successfully prosecuted Glencore Energy Limited, and the total amount the company will pay, £280 million, is the highest ever ordered in a corporate criminal conviction in the United Kingdom. We continue to work closely with the SFO to identify any policy changes that could support their ambition.
Aaron Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Solicitor General for his answer? My constituency, Newcastle-under-Lyme, are really concerned to see the government crack down on corporate criminality. So can I ask him to set out what measures the government is considering in the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Bill to address corporate crime?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for his question and for his interest. And the government does recognise that the current law does not go far enough, and that's why we've committed to address the need for a new failure to prevent offence through the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Bill. And in addition, we're introducing a provision to extend the SFO's pre-investigation powers.
Stuart C. MacDonald.
Number 9, please, Mr. Speaker.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker. By convention, whether the law officers have been asked to provide advice and the contents of such advice are, as I said earlier, not disclosed outside government. This convention enables candid legal advice to be given.
Stuart C. MacDonald.
Mr. Speaker, why was the prospect of a Section 35 order not raised at any point prior to the bill being overwhelmingly passed by the Scottish Parliament? What alternatives did she look at? And when will she set out the changes to the bill that she would want to see before the government would revoke the Section 35 order? These are simple questions, and if she can't answer them, all we can conclude is that the government has lost the last shred of respect it has for the Scottish Parliament.
But, Mr. Speaker, that would be absolutely the wrong conclusion to draw. The Attorney General's Convention is clear. The UK Government respects the Scottish Parliament's ability to legislate within its competence on devolved areas. The Government is committed to working together with the DAs and strengthening the union of the UK.
Mary Kelly Foy.
Mr. Speaker, we're committed to delivering justice for victims of hate crime. All CPS prosecutors are trained on hate crime, and its specialist prosecutors help to lead this work. The latest figures show that the CPS has prosecuted nearly 13,000 hate crime offences with a charge rate of 86% and, importantly, a conviction rate of 84%.
Marie Kelly Foy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we mark the start of LGBTQ History Month, it was shocking to see the year-end figures for hate crime, with a 41% increase in offences targeting people's sexuality and a 56% increase in offences targeting people's transgender identity. Can the Attorney General tell me what her government is doing to stop the prejudice and fear being stoked against the LGBTQ community, which is leading to this rise in crime?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I can tell the Honourable Lady that in her area, the CPS in the North East is particularly successful in getting uplifts to sentences in relation to hate crime, and that over the last rolling year to date, they have been successful in obtaining uplifts in 90% of cases. The question that the Honourable Lady raises is an important one, and the CPS is working incredibly hard in that area.
Before we come to Prime Minister's questions, I would like to point out the British Sign Language interpretation of proceedings is available to watch on Parliament Live TV. I start with questions to the Prime Minister. When you're ready, Mr. Davis, we'll start. Kirsty Blackman.
Here. Question 1, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I know the whole House will want to join me in sending condolences to the First Minister of Wales on the death of his wife, Claire. I know from the warmth of the tributes made how much she will be missed. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Kirsty Black. Here.
As the Prime Minister reaches 100 days in office this week, having pledged a government... Having pledged a government marked by integrity, what are his thoughts on the UK being one of only 5 countries, along with Oman, Azerbaijan, Myanmar and Qatar, that has seen a decrease in Transparency International's corruption index score since last year?
Well, Mr. Speaker, in fact, there's widespread recognition and support for the UK's approach to transparency and indeed tackling corruption. Indeed, the most recent report from the FATF body commended the UK for the steps that it had taken.
Sir Robert Neal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I refer to my entry in the Register of Interests. Arts Council England was established to increase access to great art for the population. There's real concern and anger that their current funding decisions do the exactly reverse of that on the basis of inadequate evidence and a lack of transparency in the process. Will my right honourable friend meet with me and other concerned members to discuss the situation in which centres of national excellence like English National Opera are at risk of closure and discuss a way in which we can reform the operations of Arts Council, which many people no longer feel is fit for purpose?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I know that this is an issue that my honourable friend deeply cares about. He will know that decisions made by the Arts Council are taken at arm's length from government. DCMS ministers have been assured that that process was robust, but I will ensure that he gets a meeting with the relevant minister to discuss this important matter further.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join the Prime Minister in his words about the First Minister of Wales and the sad loss of his wife? Everybody, I think, knows just how close they were, and I know that he's absolutely devastated by her loss at the weekend. Mr. Speaker, when the Prime Minister briefly emerged from his hibernation at the weekend, he raised more questions than answers. So, in the interests of integrity and accountability, can he set the record straight? Did his now former chair tell government officials that he was under investigation by the taxman before or after the Prime Minister appointed him?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I appointed the independent adviser to investigate this matter fully. He has set out his findings in detail over the weekend, and on receipt of those findings, I took action, and I'd refer the honourable gentleman to the independent advisor's report.
Oh, come on. Anyone picking up a newspaper in July last year would have known that HMRC and the National Crime Agency were investigating months before he appointed him. Mr. Speaker, the Independent, 6th of July, new Chancellor's finances secretly investigated by the National Crime Agency. The Observer, 3 days later, 9th of July, revealed officials raised flag over tax affairs before he was appointed Chancellor. The Financial Times, the next day, 10th of July, pressure bills to explain his finances. Is he saying his officials hid this information from him, or was he just too incurious to ask any questions?
Mr. Speaker, as I've said before at the dispatch box, the usual appointments process was followed with respect to the Minister without portfolio. No issues were raised with me at the time of his appointment, but as the independent advisor's report makes clear, there was a serious breach of the ministerial code, and that's why I took decisive action on receipt of that report.
So, in relation to his former chair, his defence is, nobody told me, I didn't know, I didn't ask any questions. Is the Prime Minister now also going to claim that he was the...
Order, Prime Minister. Mr Gullis, we heard enough last week. I can't hear what you're saying. I might not be able to hear what you're saying, but I can certainly see your mouth moving. It'll be moving outside if it continues. Prime Minister.
So for his former chair, nobody told me, I didn't know, I didn't ask any questions. Is the Prime Minister now also going to claim that he's the only person completely unaware of serious allegations of bullying against the Deputy Prime Minister before he appointed him?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman asked these questions about what was known, and I followed due process. I appointed an independent adviser as soon as I was made aware of new information. The independent advisers conducted this process. But if he is so concerned about what people are saying and is so concerned about behaviour in public life, then recently one of his own MPs was forced to speak out because being in his party had reminded her of being in an abusive relationship. And then his own office was caught undermining her. He ought to be supporting her and her colleagues, but if he can't be trusted to stand up for the women in his party, he can't be trusted to stand up for Britain.
Mr. Speaker, at the last count, the Deputy Prime Minister was facing 24 separate allegations of bullying. According to recent reports, some of the complainants were physically sick. One says they were left suicidal. How would he feel if one of his friends or relatives was being forced to work for a bully simply because the man at the top was too weak to do anything about it?
Mr. Speaker, I noticed he didn't say anything about why one of his own MPs describes being in his own party. And Mr. Nipper, when I was made aware of formal complaints, I instructed a leading independent KC to conduct an investigation because I take action when these things happen. But what did he say at the weekend? He said at the weekend that hate had been allowed to spread unchallenged in the Labour Party under his predecessor. He was speaking as if he wasn't even there. But he was sitting right next to him, supporting him for 4 long years, not challenging. And it is typical of him, Mr. Speaker, declining to lead, sitting on the fence, carping from the sidelines, and never standing up for a principle that matters.
I want to hear both sides, and I'm not going to be interrupted by either side. And I'm particularly looking for people who want to continue this, because we will sort it out today.
Keir Starmer.
Speaker, he's just like one of his predecessors who treated questions about conduct as something to brush off, who thought that ducking responsibility was a perfectly reasonable response for a Prime Minister. At least in fairness, his predecessor didn't go around pretending he was a paragon of integrity and accountability. But on that subject, was it a coincidence that the two people who arranged an £800,000 line of credit for the former Prime Minister were both shortlisted for plum jobs at the BBC and the British Council?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as we addressed previously, the appointments process for the BBC chairman is rigorous, it's transparent, it's set out in a public code of conduct, and indeed was fully supported not just by an expert panel members, but also by the cross-party DCMS Select Committee, including where Labour members described the appointment as impressive. But Mr. Speaker, back this week in terms of what is actually happening to the people of this country, he voted this week with the unions to oppose minimum safety levels. He voted with Just Stop Oil to water down the public order bill. And what do the unions and Just Stop Oil have in common? They bankroll him and his party, Mr. Speaker. So while he sides with extremist protesters and union bosses, we stand up for hard-working Britons and school children.
After 13 years in power, trying to blame the Labour Party for his failure to sort out the strikes it's rank pathetic. The Tory party's addiction to sleaze and scandal has done huge damage to this country, and the cost to the public keeps adding up. We've got a justice system letting murderers walk the streets, heart attack victims waiting hours for an ambulance, an economy that's shrinking quicker than his leadership. And even I couldn't quite believe it when I saw that his government is expecting taxpayers to pay the legal fees for the member for Uxbridge defending himself over his lockdown rule breaking. £250,000. Surely even this Prime Minister can put his foot down, stand up to his old boss and tell him he made the mess, he can pick up the bill.
Mr. Speaker, he can't stand up to his union bosses. He can't stand up for Britain's school children today. And he can't stand up for the women in his party, Mr. Speaker. We're getting on, we're halving inflation, we're growing the economy, we're reducing debt, we're cutting waiting lists, and we're stopping the boat. While he can't even figure out what he believes in, we'll keep delivering for Britain.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that the integrated care boards must prioritise more access to new GP services, especially in places like South Derbyshire, where new housing estates are being built at the fastest rate in England, and in particular on the new brownfield development of Drakelow?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the government is committed to increasing the number of doctors in general practice, and last year saw the highest ever number of doctors accept a GP training place. The BMA are consulted each year on the funding of GP services, and my honourable friend will know that the NHS has a statutory duty to ensure sufficient medical services, including general practice, in each local area.
Leader of the SNP, Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to pass on my condolences and indeed those of my party to the First Minister of Wales and also to the family, friends and colleagues of firefighter Barry Martin, who so sadly lost his life following the blaze in Edinburgh just last week. Mr. Speaker, we've just marked the 3-year anniversary of Brexit, and we've learned... They'll not be cheering in a moment, Mr. Speaker, because we have learned three things. The UK's trade deficit has grown. The economy is being hit to the tune of £100 billion each year, and of course, we know that the UK's economy is expected to be the worst performing of all advanced nations. Does the Prime Minister still believe that the UK can afford not to be in the European Union?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if you actually look at it, since Brexit, the UK has grown exactly the same as Germany has, Mr. Speaker. But not only that, we are taking advantage of Brexit to deliver for the people across the UK, whether it's the fishing and farming communities of Scotland, whether it's through the 2 new free ports that we've just announced. But, Mr. Speaker, the difference between his party and ours is that we respect referendums.
Mr. Speaker, let's be clear. Taken together, 2022 and 2023 are expected to be the worst years for living standards since the 1930s, and the economy is expected to perform worse than sanction-hit Russia. So as the Brexit ship sinks, with the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition at the helm, does he blame those Scots who want to jump aboard the independence lifeboat?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the number one factor that is impacting people's living standards, inflation, caused by high energy prices as a result of a war in Ukraine, Mr. Speaker. It's got nothing to do with Brexit, and that's why the government is taking significant action, supporting every family with £900 this winter. But what I would say to him is, rather than obsess about constitutional arrangements, focus on delivering for the people of Scotland. That's what we will do.
David Johnson.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The baby daughter of my constituents, Gary and Sarah Andrews, died just 23 minutes after she was born. When they asked questions about that, the parents were told that these things happen, and that if they had to listen to the concerns of every mother, they would be overrun. Thanks to dogged campaigning by Gary and Sarah and other parents whose babies had died avoidably, Nottingham University Hospital's trust was found to have systemic failures, and last week was given the highest fine that's ever been given for failings in maternity care. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that this case, this situation, has to serve not just as a watershed moment for having the highest standards of maternity care, but also that when things do go wrong in something like an NHS trust or another public body, they have to be open and honest and transparent about their failings so that people can get the truth and not have it hidden from them?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm very sorry to hear about the tragic case that my honourable friend raises, and I know the whole House will join me in sending our thoughts to Gary and Sarah. We want to make sure that the NHS is the best and safest place in the world to give birth, and the NHS has taken steps to improve, but cases such as the one that my honourable friend raises highlight that more must be done. Nottingham University Trust is receiving support from the expert maternity improvement advisors, and nationally the Royal College is implementing the recommendations from the independent Ockenden report, together with £127 million of extra investment. But my honourable friend is absolutely right. When situations like this do arise, transparency is paramount so we can seek answers and make improvements.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's nearly 10 years since the tragic death of 9-year-old Ella Roberta, the first person ever to have air pollution listed on her death certificate. Yesterday's Environmental Improvement Plan pledges to improve air quality, but the government's targets are for 2040. That's a whole generation away. I don't think that's fast enough, and neither does Ella's mum, Rosamond Adu Kisi-Deborah. So on her mum's behalf, will the Prime Minister agree to meet us both to discuss the life-saving measures in a new proposed bill called Ella's Law?
Mr. Speaker, it's obviously very sad to hear the case of Ella, and our thoughts and hearts go out to her family. With regard to the legislation, as my honourable friend the Environment Secretary will be making a statement later today, we are confident that the measures we are putting in place are not only legally binding but also world-leading in tackling air quality. The record over the past 10 years is one where every single air particulate has been reduced, with binding targets to continue reducing them in future, and indeed the Environment Act makes sure that we have the capability, accountability and ambition we need to make all the effective interventions to drive down air pollution.
Dr. Liam Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Compared to what some people seem to believe, 82% of the jobs in our economy are in the private sector. compared to 18% in the public sector. Most of those private sector jobs will be in small businesses, the small businesses that we will depend upon for wealth creation and prosperity in the future. Will my right honourable friend consider bringing in a small business test across government so that every regulation we produce, every bit of legislation we produce will help, not hinder, small businesses? And does he share my ambition that every white van man and woman and every white coat tech worker in this country will regard the Conservative Party as their natural champions?
Well, my right honourable friend is absolutely right, and this government is proud to join with him in supporting small businesses. I'm pleased to tell my honourable friend that we do have a small business test to consider whether the impacts of regulatory changes will disproportionately affect small and micro businesses. I will make sure that we are applying that test rigorously, and he'll be pleased to know that many small businesses will benefit from billions of pounds in business rates reductions this coming financial year, as well as our annual investment allowance, which at £1 million is the most generous tax incentive for investment for small businesses anywhere in the world.
And McLaughlin.
Mr. Speaker, this morning, just 2 hours ago, I launched the APPG on prepayment meters. I did so because most people on these meters are on very low incomes, and yet they pay more per unit of energy than the Prime Minister does. They pay higher daily standing charges than the Prime Minister. They're automatically disconnected from their energy supply the second they run out of money. And perversely, right now, record numbers of people are being forced onto them by the energy companies. Can the Prime Minister even begin to imagine how terrifying that moment is when the lights go out and everything shuts down? And will he agree with me, rather than reading out, please, what he's got written in front of him, will he just agree with me that what I've just described is completely unfair?
Mr. Speaker, the government does recognise the challenges facing those on prepayment meters, and that's why the government is taking action. The Secretary of State has set out 5 very specific points on prepayment meters, energy suppliers being spoken to make sure that they treat customers with the respect and flexibility that they deserve. And finally, Ofgem have announced that they are launching a review into supplier practices in relation to prepayment meters. But all of this, Mr. Speaker, comes on top of the considerable financial support that this government has provided to help people with their energy bills, with more of that support being targeted at the most vulnerable families in our society.
McLean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After 8,000 residents of Redditch signed my petition to bring back chemotherapy to the Alex, the Trust reversed their decision to leave it at Kidderminster permanently. A fantastic win for our town. And I'm grateful to the local acute trust for listening so carefully and changing their mind. So does the Prime Minister agree with me that it's right that the acute trust can change its mind on the provision of maternity and paediatric services so that women can give birth in our wonderful town of Redditch?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend has clearly been a fantastic advocate for the Alex and for her constituents. We have awarded £10.5 million to the local trust, and I understand that some of that funding is being used to improve maternity and paediatric services at the nearby Worcestershire Royal. My honourable friend will know that these operational decisions are being made by integrated care boards, and I know that she will continue to make her views known.
Andrew Gwynn.
Mr. Speaker, if I had £1 for every time I'd heard the Prime Minister's weak excuses, I'd be able to pay the former Chancellor's tax bill. Because it was last July that it was reported that the National Crime Agency had investigated the Right Honourable Member for Stratford-on-Avon. The then Prime Minister knew. The media knew. We all knew. It's inconceivable that the current Prime Minister didn't know. So why did he choose to ignore it?
That's right.
Mr. Speaker, I appointed an independent adviser to fully examine the matter, establish facts and report back. That's the process that the party opposite called for. That's the process that we followed.
John Penrose.
Mr. Speaker, 2 years ago the Prime Minister commissioned me to propose 30 ways to boost growth and make Britain the most competitive country in the world. So far we're underway with about half of them, but some of the most valuable, like reforming ponderous and expensive utilities regulators or building on our international lead in open banking, haven't moved at all. So will he meet with me to discuss how to channel our inner Nigel Lawsons and unblock the arteries of our economy with low-cost, pro-competition supply-side reforms?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend has a long track record in advocating for and implementing policies that increase our competitiveness and reform the supply side of our economy. His report was fantastic, and I look forward to meeting with him to discuss them further and help drive growth in this country.
From West.
Mr. Speaker, ambulance waiting times are out of control. My constituent contacted me regarding her 93-year-old mother who lay collapsed on the ground at home for 17 hours and then queued for 13 hours to get into the hospital. And yet on Monday, the Prime Minister said he had his fingers crossed that ambulance waiting times would be reduced. Does he really think that's enough?
Mr. Speaker, if the honourable lady actually looked, we published on Monday a comprehensive plan to reduce wait times in A&E and with ambulances, backed with more funding and reform of the system, more beds, more ambulances, more staff. And indeed, Mr. Speaker, it was a plan that was warmly welcomed by all of those working in emergency care and the ambulance services. They recognise that this plan will deliver reduced waiting times and improve care across the country, including in Labour-run Wales, where there are some things we can benefit them from.
Jerome Mayo.
Mr. Speaker, if you grow up in Norfolk and you want to be a dentist, the nearest place you can train is in Birmingham or in London. So it's not really surprising, is it, that in Norfolk we have a dearth of dentists, whether it's NHS or private. We also know that where there is a dental training school, more dentists end up working locally. So will my right honourable friend agree to look again at the benefits of establishing a dental training school alongside the excellent medical school at the University of East Anglia?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend will know that there are around 400 dentists with NHS activity in Norfolk and Waveney. But he's right, the Centres of Dental Development build on the existing local infrastructure to help retain and recruit dentists. And I would advise him to encourage his local integrated care board to look at proposals for one of those centres in his area.
Mary Kelly Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister once said that he didn't have any working class friends. So we may not be aware that today 500,000 hard-working people are on strike, including in his own constituency. Tory Britain isn't working. Is the Prime Minister going to get a grip and negotiate with working people, or does he intend being remembered as the PM who silenced and sacked hard-working nurses, paramedics, teachers, rail workers and firefighters in a cost-of-living crisis?
Well, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to teachers, we've actually given teachers the highest pay rise in 30 years. It includes a 9% pay rise for newly qualified teachers and record investment in their training and development. I am clear that our children's education is precious and they deserve to be in school today being taught. And actually the party opposite would do well to say that the strikes are wrong and we should be backing our school children.
Dr. Neil Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sadly, suicide is the biggest killer of young people under 35 in the UK. My constituent, Andy Airy, along with Tim Owen and Mike Palmer, are the three dads walking. Andy, Tim and Mike each tragically lost their precious daughters, Sophie, Emily and Beth, to suicide, and have campaigned tirelessly through charity walking for suicide awareness and prevention to be included in the school curriculum. I've been humbled to support them, including joining them on their UK walk as they came through Penrith, with their petition which is due for parliamentary debate on the 13th of March, and with my early day motion which has support from right across the House. Would the Prime Minister join me in paying tribute to the three dads? And would he meet with me and the three dads to discuss suicide prevention and ultimately save young lives in the future?
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course I pay tribute to Andy Tim and Mike, especially for channeling their own personal tragedies into such positive action to prevent this happening to other families. That is inspiring and they deserve enormous credit. The government is taking action to improve the provision of mental health services for young people in schools and colleges, but I would be delighted to meet with him and Andy, Mike and Tim to discuss what more we can do.
Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for that welcome. Ordinary people didn't need to hear an IMF forecast to understand that the UK economy is the worst performer amongst the leading nations in the world. They live with it every day. People know their energy bills are through the roof. They know that 750,000 households face defaulting on their mortgages while house prices fall. And they know that food prices are rising at a record rate of 16.7% as of today. The Prime Minister is 100 days in office, his party 13 years in power. In all that time, does the Prime Minister ever reflect that the only thing that the Tory party has been good at is pushing people into poverty?
Oh, Mr. Speaker, it is wonderful to hear from the right honourable gentleman, and I'd love to see him in his place. What I would say is that we're continuing to deliver for people across the UK, including and in Scotland. He mentioned poverty. Poverty today, lower than when the Conservatives first came into office. Inequality, lower than when the Conservatives first came into office. And the number of people in low pay, the lowest on record.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today in my constituency there is a great sense of shock and disbelief following last night's horrific dog attack that killed a 4-year-old girl. The police investigation is still going on and it wouldn't be appropriate to speculate on the circumstances. But it would mean a great deal if, on behalf of the House, the Prime Minister could send our condolences to the family and to the community, and to thank the emergency services for dealing with this situation with their customary compassion and professionalism.
Prime Minister. Well, I thank my honourable friend and send my condolences, and I'm sure the whole House's condolences, to the girl's family and the community after this horrific incident, and I join him in thanking the emergency services. They have responded rapidly and professionally, and I know that my honourable friend himself will be supporting them and his constituents during this difficult time.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. This past weekend... Can I blame the pain? Can I blame the painkillers? Apologies, Mr. Speaker, and thank you. This past weekend, I visited a charity which was hosting an exhibition in my constituency about metastatic breast cancer, which claims 31 lives each day in the United Kingdom. And the women there asked me to convey at the first opportunity to the government the need for more awareness, more support, more research and more drug availability. Can I ask the Prime Minister if he will do that, if he will help to bring that support? But also, I have written to the Scottish Government asking for their support, if in his next meeting with the First Minister he would mention it to her.
Well, Mr. Speaker, can I pay tribute to the charity that the Honourable Lady mentioned and for the work they do? She's absolutely right. Awareness is key in tackling and identifying breast cancer symptoms early. One of the reasons why we're investing more in diagnostic and screening tools to make sure that we can detect more cancers earlier and treat them and ultimately save people's lives. I would be happy to pick up this particular topic with the First Minister when I next speak to her and ensure that we are working together to improve cancer services for everyone, regardless of where they live in the UK.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the United Kingdom government's negotiations with the EU regarding the Northern Ireland Protocol, would the Prime Minister kindly confirm to the House that the sovereignty of the United Kingdom and its four nations will not be compromised?
Mr. Speaker, I can give my honourable friend that assurance. I know this is something that he cares passionately about. The implementation of the protocol is having an impact for communities in Northern Ireland. That's why it needs to be addressed, and that's what we are attempting to do through constructive dialogue. But the goal in that must be to ensure Northern Ireland's place in our precious union.
Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since the election of the fascist Israeli government in December last year, there has been an increase in human rights violations against Palestinian civilians, including children. So can the Prime Minister tell us how he is challenging what Amnesty and other human rights organisations are referring to an apartheid state?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady also failed to mention the horrific attacks on civilians inside Israel as well. And it's important in this matter to remain calm and urge all sides to strive for peace. And that's very much what I will do as Prime Minister and in the conversations that I've had with the Israeli Prime Minister.
Sir John Hayes, final.
Mr. Speaker, in 2016, the British people had the wisdom and foresight to take back control from foreign lawmakers. And when they did so, they believed we were taking back control of our borders. Yet since that time, we have faced wave after wave of illegal migration. So will my right honourable friend, without further delay, bring forward the necessary legislation to turn back the tide and fulfil the promise that was made to the British people then?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend makes an excellent point. That's why one of this government's 5 priorities and promises to the British people is indeed to stop the boats. We will introduce new legislation that makes it unequivocally clear that if you arrive in this country illegally, you will not be able to stay. We will swiftly detain you and remove you to your own country or a safe third alternative. That's the right and responsible way to tackle this problem.
Completes questions. Before we come to the urgent question, I wish to state that while I encourage members not to refer to any ongoing legal proceedings, I am prepared to allow a full discussion of the matter given the importance of the issue. So we now come to the urgent question. I call Ian Burton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Home Secretary if the Home Office will make a statement on the National Police response to the Hillsborough family's report.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'm extremely grateful to the honourable member for his question. I know this is a subject with very profound personal resonance for him, and I pay tribute to him and many others for the work they have done and continue to do in memories of the victims of this awful tragedy and to ensure the lessons are learned. The Hillsborough disaster was an awful, devastating tragedy. Its impact continues to be felt to this day, especially by the families and the friends of the victims. I'm sure the thoughts of the whole House are with them. It is imperative that lessons are learnt from the experiences the Hillsborough families have gone through. So I am very grateful to Bishop James Jones for the report he produced, highlighting a number of points of learning for the government, for the police and for other agencies. As my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, said yesterday during the debate, the government is fully committed to engaging with the Hillsborough families prior to the publication of the government's formal response. And I can also say that in particular, since arriving in the Home Office 2 or 3 months ago, I've asked for this work to be sped up.
and we are expecting it to come out in the course of this spring. Mr. Speaker, the National Police Chiefs Council and the College of Policing published their response earlier this week. I welcome their commitment to avoiding repeating the mistakes that were made and for the apology which they gave. They made clear that strong ethical values, the need for humanity and humility in the police response to public tragedies is critical, and one of the commitments they made, rightly, earlier this week is to substantially strengthen and update their own code of ethics in relation to these issues. Mr. Speaker, there have been some very important steps made by the government in the last few years, responding, which have addressed a number of the points, but not all of the points, which Bishop James Jones published. For example, in February in 2020, a suite of police integrity reforms were introduced on a statutory basis via the professional standards for policing, which included, critically, a duty to cooperate with inquiries. Other initiatives have been taken forward to support bereaved families already, including the removal of means testing for exceptional case funding to cover legal support for families at inquests, which broadens the scope and access for families, and refreshing our guide to coroner services for bereaved people so it's more tailored to their needs and it provides improved guidance for others involved in the inquest process. The Inquiries Act 2005 also provides a statutory process for funding legal representation requests. Last year, the Home Office also established an independent pathology review and additional consultation with the families is now taking place. A consultation has also taken place on retaining police documents, which was the subject of a recommendation made by the Bishop, and the Ministry of Justice have also consulted on establishing an independent public advocate. Those steps, I think, are important. They go a long way towards improving the situation, but they don't cover everything, of course, that the Bishop recommended, which is why we will be responding in full. Our intention is to do so this spring, but after, of course, full and deep engagement with the families concerned. Mr. Speaker, the government is committed to making sure these lessons are learned following this awful tragedy, and I, as the newly appointed Police Minister, will do everything I can to work with members across the House, but particularly those members representing the affected communities, to make sure this does now happen quickly.
Since that awful day on the 15th of April 1989, 97 people died directly from the actions of South Yorkshire Police and other agencies, including the emergency services, the FA and Sheffield Wednesday Football Club, with families destroyed and survivors traumatised, so traumatised that many have since taken their own lives. The lies and smears from the establishment cover-up, who acted with impunity and arrogance because they could, meant justice was never delivered for all those who died and suffered since. In 2017, Bishop Jones delivered a report, The Patronising Disposition of Unaccountable Power, a report to ensure the pain and suffering of the Hillsborough families is not repeated. Shamefully, we have not yet had a government response to his recommendations to a report commissioned by the then Prime Minister, the Honourable Member for Maidenhead. Bishop Jones yesterday said the delay was intolerable. His recommendations are in essence the Hillsborough Law, which so many in this place and outside have since campaigned for. We must always remember these recommendations are to ensure no other community go through the suffering we have endured since 1989. They hopefully future-proof the ability to gain justice. Yesterday, we finally had the response to the report from the College of Policing and the National Police Chiefs Council. This was the first apology from the police force for its actions since the disaster 33 years ago. For so many, including myself, it's far too little and far too late. Yesterday's recommendations from the police did not go anywhere near far enough to change the culture we came up against in our quest for justice. So I ask the Minister, will this government do the right thing for future generations of our nation and implement a Hillsborough Law containing Bishop Jones's recommendations with immediate effect? The families and survivors of so many disasters and consequent state cover-ups deserve nothing less, and these injustices must never ever be allowed. If a Hillsborough Law had existed in 1989, we would have had a chance of justice for the 97. Without it, we had none.
Minister.
Well, look, I fully understand and respect the sentiments that the honourable member just so powerfully expressed in his remarks. In relation to the timing and the years that have passed since the Bishop's report, for much of that time there were ongoing legal proceedings, and of course nobody wanted to prejudice those for obvious reasons. That accounted for about 4 years, from 2017 to around about May of 2021. But about 21 months have passed since then, and I agree that the government response does need to come out quickly. It's something that since my appointment a couple of months ago I've asked to get sped up, and I want to try and make sure that happens this spring, but following, of course, consultation with the families that obviously is extremely important, and that will include responses to the points that he made. But I would just reiterate that the statutory changes made to the professional standards for policing in 2020 do include a duty of cooperation on police officers in relation to inquiries, which is a very important thing, as he said already. But he is right, we do need to get on and respond comprehensively to the Bishop's recommendations, which is what I'm working on.
Theresa May.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The apology from the police is, of course, welcome. But frankly, it would have been far better for them to have done their job properly on that fateful April day 34 years ago. If they had done so, families of the 97, and indeed the whole Liverpool community, would not have gone through the suffering and anguish that they've had to bear over the last 34 years. Can I say first to my right honourable friend, saying vaguely that the government's response will be available this spring, I do not think is good enough. 5 years on, the government must publish its response. But will he agree with me that one of the elements that can be put in place to help families who, if sadly such an event, a tragedy of this sort happens in the future, is the introduction of what was promised in the Conservative Party manifesto in 2017 of an independent public advocate? And will he commit now that the Home Office will not put any barriers in the way of the work of the Ministry of Justice to introduce such a body?
Well, I thank my right honourable friend for her question. I mean, as I mentioned, for about approximately 4 years since the publication of the report, there were ongoing criminal legal proceedings which nobody wanted to prejudice. But as I have said in the House, and as the Home Secretary said yesterday, we do want to now get on and quickly respond comprehensively to the Bishop's report. In relation to the independent public advocate, a measure being worked on by the Ministry of Justice, as the right honourable lady said, a public consultation has taken place on that, and the response is being worked through in the usual way, but it's happening at pace.
Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank my honourable friend, the member for West Derby, and also all of the Merseyside MPs for pursuing this and securing this urgent question. 97 people lost their lives as a result of what happened at Hillsborough on that terrible day 34 years ago. And we remember the football fans who never came home, and we must also never forget the shameful cover-up that followed. The Hillsborough families have fought for decades against obfuscation and lies to get to the truth. And everyone hoped that Bishop John James' report would be a turning point, and I welcome the work the former Home Secretary did to commission that report. But it is 5 years on. The police rightly have said that it was police failures that were the main cause of the tragedy, and police failures have continued to blight the lives of families ever since. But to do so just 5 years on takes too long, and it makes it even more shameful that there is still no government response to what has happened. The Home Secretary yesterday said it was because of active criminal proceedings, but those finished 18 months ago, and the work could have taken place even while those proceedings were ongoing. It's September of 2021. The government announced the response would be published by the end of the year, and we are still waiting. The Home Secretary said yesterday the government was engaging with families, but what engagement has taken place? Has the Home Secretary met with them? Has she met with the bishops? And I have to say, where is she today? Because previous Home Secretaries have shown the respect to the families and to the appalling ways in which they have been wronged by being here to respond. And it is a devastating failure of responsibility and respect to them not to be here to respond. The key measures that we need a government response have been well known. On the duty of candour, on the public advocate, on the elements of the Hillsborough law, the Labour Party stands ready to support that law to get it into statute. So will the government now commit to support that Hillsborough law and to recognise what the Bishop has said about it being intolerable, the pain to those families not to have a response? The report was called The Patronising Disposition of Unaccountable Power. Will he recognise that that is exactly what this continued delay will feel like to so many families and survivors now?
Minister.
Well, I entirely agree with the Shadow Home Secretary's opening comments about the appalling impact, and indeed of other members, the appalling impact this has had on the families of those who so tragically lost their lives. I took my own son to a Crystal Palace football game just a few weeks ago, and just thinking about how awful it must have been to be trapped in those circumstances is too just a terrible thing to contemplate. The police have apologised, as the Shadow Home Secretary said, for the terrible failings that took place on the day and in the years subsequently. It's right that they've apologised to the families and to the country as well. In relation to the timing, I've said already, there were legal proceedings ongoing. It has been 18 to 21 months since those have concluded, which is why, since I was appointed, I've asked for this work to be sped up, and it will be concluded very rapidly. But I do just want to, and it will respond to all of the points in full, but I do just want to repeat the point I made earlier, that a number of things have happened already. She mentioned the Independent Public Advocate, where a public consultation has taken place, which, as she will know from her own time in government, it is, generally speaking, a prelude to action. And on the question of cooperating with, inquiries, the statutory professional standards for policing introduced in 2020 did introduce that requirement, but the response does need to cover all of the points, and that will happen very soon.
Sir Robert Butler.
Mr. Speaker, I listened with great care to my right honourable friend's statement, but I do have to press him on the independent public advocate point. As my right honourable friend, the member for Maidenhead, said, the Ministry of Justice, which I had the honour of leading, and worked with her and the honourable member for Garton and Halewood, is in a position to go ahead with this policy. The consultation was 5 years ago. What's stopping the government from doing this?
Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I mean, as I said before to others, including the former Prime Minister, the consultation has, as my right honourable friend said, taken place. The usual processes in government are going on in relation to responding to that consultation, and as soon as the Ministry of Justice are able to make an announcement on this, they will most certainly be doing so.
We now come to the SNP spokesperson, Stuart C. MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I also start by commending the honourable member and his colleagues, not just for securing the urgent question, but for all their campaigning work on behalf of survivors and families affected by Hillsborough. The persistence, the bravery and the decency of the people of Liverpool over these 34 years has been utterly extraordinary in the face of cover-up and smear. But they need more than warm words. They need a comprehensive response. And the long overdue police report, while a start, doesn't provide a complete response. That needs government, and we should have had a government response before now. As Bishop Jones has said, the wait has been intolerable, and families themselves are speaking about the Bishop's report gathering dust. Now, I appreciate there are various questions which are not going to be answered today in light of the announcement of a spring publication. But can the Minister at least assure us that when that long overdue response from the government is published, we can have a full debate on the floor of this House on its findings and the full response? And secondly, he referred to engagement with the families. Now, there has been some good engagement, but there have been some ropey times as well. Can he say a little bit more about what form that engagement will take going forward?
Minister.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question and for the sentiments that he expressed, which I completely understand. In relation to a full debate, I mean, scheduling business in the House is not my responsibility, but it would seem to me like a reasonable request to make, and it's certainly one that I will pass on to my colleagues who are responsible for scheduling parliamentary business. Families have been fully engaged with. Indeed, one of the reasons why the independent pathology review, which had been commenced, has been temporarily paused, is to allow for more engagement to take place, because families felt they wanted to be, quite rightly, more involved. So that engagement is continuing, and critically, before the government response is published, there will be more such engagement for the obvious reasons that the honourable gentleman quite rightly pointed to.
Alexander Stafford.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. The Hillsborough disaster and the following cover-up by South Yorkshire Police was a devastating tragedy, which undermined my communities in Rother Valley and South Yorkshire's faith in the police. So the police apology yesterday was the bare minimum that could be done. Will my right honourable friend, though, assure me that the government will thoroughly engage both with the families of the 97, but also the wider communities in Liverpool, but also Leeds and Sheffield as part of this process, to make sure that lessons will be learned so that this awful tragedy will not happen again, and there will also be no more police cover-ups to such awful disasters?
Minister.
Yeah, well, my honourable friend makes a very powerful point. I agree with the points he's made, and yes, I can confirm the engagement he rightly requests will happen.
Chair of the Select Committee, Dame Diana Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It was a great pleasure to meet Bishop James Jones recently. And as an aside, can I also pay tribute to his work in securing the infected blood inquiry, which again is an example of the patronising disposition of unaccountable power, where cover-ups and secrecy become a further scandal on top of the original events. Could I just ask the Minister, as the Home Secretary isn't here, has the Home Secretary met with Bishop James Jones to discuss his report on Hillsborough and the government response?
Minister.
I'm afraid I don't have visibility of the Home Secretary's diary, so I can't give her a direct answer to the question. I can certainly ask the Home Secretary and ask the Home Secretary to write to the Select Committee Chairman responding to that question. But what I can, and I would like to add my thanks to hers, to the Bishop, for the work that he's done in both of the two areas the Select Committee Chairman referred to. But I can say that in the coming months there will be very full engagement with all of the interested parties, including members of Parliament representing the relevant communities for the reasons that she mentioned.
Rob Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I was at university in Sheffield at the time of the Hillsborough disaster. A friend of mine died in that tragedy, another was seriously injured. And I'd like to pay tribute to the residents of Sheffield, who are very rarely mentioned, but who shared and showed both compassion and real practical support on the day to people who they did not know. They raced to the stadium, they offered free taxi journeys to people to help them get to where they needed to go. They looked after them in their homes, they provided them with hot meals. It was an incredibly moving thing to witness. It has taken too long to learn the lessons of Hillsborough, so can my honourable friend confirm, irrespective of the timing of the publication of a government response, that he will emphasise to all police forces around the country that if there is ever another such appalling tragedy, their officers must behave openly and sympathetically, even if that means showing their own shortcomings?
Minister.
Yes, I can do that, and I thank the honourable gentleman for his question, particularly in light of his own, the way he's been affected personally by the tragedy as well. So yes, I can give him that assurance, and some steps have been taken already, partly through the statutory professional standards for policing changes made in 2020, and that will be further reinforced by the updated Code of Ethics, which the College of Policing will be publishing following their announcement yesterday, with exactly the purpose in mind that he just set out.
Maria Riedel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's unconscionable that after 18 months following the collapse of the criminal trials, there has still been no government response to the Bishop's report. And the fact that we have to wait until spring, whenever that is, shows that the work isn't finished. Over 5 years after that report was written and
published, and it's outrageous that the government have done nothing in that time to sort this out. The Minister keeps referring to the consultation on the Independent Public Advocate. That happened in 2018. The government has not yet responded to its own consultation on the Independent Public Advocate, but I can get the Minister off the hook. My Public Advocate number 2 bill is back in this chamber to be considered this Friday. If, rather than object to it for the 12th time this session, the Minister were to stop his whip from doing so, we could get it into committee and we could start this legislation rolling, because it's a key part of the Hillsborough law, and along with the duty of candour and the equality of arms at inquests, the support of this party's front bench, the Minister could do himself and his government a favour by getting this legislation through.
Minister.
Okay, well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. As I've said, we are working on the comprehensive response quickly. She said that nothing has happened since 2017, and with great respect, I don't think that is entirely accurate. I've referenced the professional standards for policing introduced in 2020, introducing a duty to cooperate. I've mentioned the pathology review that's happened. I've mentioned the consultation on the Independent Public Advocate, and I can tell her that is being very actively worked on by the Ministry of Justice as we speak. We've had the changes made to the exceptional case funding at inquest, so the means testing has been removed. So a lot has been done, but I do accept that a comprehensive government response is required. And since arriving at the Home Office, I have asked for that to be done as quickly as possible, and it will be.
Kevin Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Anyone who knows the story of Coventry City's 1987 Cup run will know that there was a match at Hillsborough where a near crush took place, again making what then happened 2 years later tragically predictable. Now, the Hillsborough disaster was a tragedy. The lies, smears and cover-ups that followed were an absolute disgrace, worrying echoes of which we saw after the Champions League final last year. So the extended delay in getting this response out just makes it even worse. Would he at least today commit to the principle of the Independent Public Advocate to ensure that in future families would be on a level playing field?
Minister.
Well, I thank the honourable member for his question, and I agree with his point about the policing failures at the time. And it is right that the police comprehensively apologised yesterday for the police's behaviour, both at the time and in the years subsequently. As I say, the consultation did happen on the Independent Public Advocate, and it is under active consideration at the moment. I don't want to preempt the Ministry of Justice's work on that, because it is for the Ministry of Justice to publicly respond, but I can tell my honourable friend and others that they are actively working on it at the moment.
Derek Twig.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's an absolute disgrace that the Home Secretary was sat on those benches just before this debate started. That's completely left. A disaster which has no parallel in terms of the way what happened and the injustice that took place. I'm quite sure that the Right Honourable Member for the Honourable Lady from Maidenhead would never have left the front bench in these circumstances. So can I say to you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, as you may be aware, is that I have a number of constituents who lost loved ones at Hillsborough, and I was present that day myself at the disaster. And part of the problem that existed over the years, apart from the general injustice, and myself and my right honourable friend and member for Garrison and Hillsborough, I'm sure she will agree, are so proud and privileged to have worked with the Hillsborough families over the years in fighting for justice. But part of the injustice was the continued delays and time to try and get to justice and actually get to the bottom of what went wrong, even though we all knew, and get the report out. It took a long, long time. And this is adding to that torture of the families and those people who are affected by Hillsborough. So can I say to the Minister, saying that you hope to have a response by the spring is just not good enough. And therefore, can I ask the Minister to come back to this House before we go into the recess in February with an actual date of when that response will be given to the House?
Minister.
I thank the honourable member for his question, particularly given he's had such direct personal experience of the tragedy that unfolded, and he was there indeed himself all those years ago. Look, I do agree that speed of resolution is now important after all this time. Too much time has passed, and I can give him my assurance that I want this done as soon as possible. It's something I've personally pressed for since arriving, and I will be doing everything I can to expedite this and get the comprehensive response published as quickly as possible.
Blackman.
Mr Deputy Speaker, for football fans everywhere, the 15th of April 1989 is seared on their memory, and my sympathy is with the families of the victims who tragically lost their lives. One of the problems here is that, as my honourable friend has alluded to, this could have happened in 1987. It could have happened in 1981. I was present for the semi-final held at Hillsborough when crushing took place. But the difference then, there were no cages. In 1989, there were the Liverpool fans who lost their life were caged in and couldn't escape. The key problem here is that the policing back in 1981, back in 1987 and in 1989 was followed in the same way. The lessons weren't learned. I personally gave evidence to the inquiry about what happened in 1981, yet nothing seems to have happened about those aspects of policing. So, will my honourable friend, in replying to this, ensure that the duty of candour, the other legislative measures that we need to make sure that the police own up to their mistakes, rather than cover them up for literally 34 years? They may apologise now, but it's far too late for the victims.
Minister.
Well, I think my honourable friend is obviously right to point to the police failings at the time and the fact that they essentially created the tragic situation that unfolded. The apology they gave yesterday is important. It was comprehensive. I think it was heartfelt, and it's good that they've done that. It is also important that they change the way that they respond in those circumstances, as the honourable member just said. And that is why the changes to the Code of Ethics that the College of Policing will be bringing forward are important, and it's why the duty of candour that I referred to previously, enshrined in the statutory professional standards, are important as well. But I do agree with the point he made.
Dan Gordon.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The former Bishop of Liverpool, James Jones's report laid bare the sheer scale of the failure of the police at Hillsborough and the lies and the smears and the state cover-up that followed. And it is disappointing, to say the least, that it has taken this long for an apology to come from the National Police Chief Council and the College of Policing, and it does nothing to undo the horrific abuse of power that has been seen. What's worse and what's more shameful is that we're still waiting for the government's response to the report 5 years on. Mr Deputy Speaker, the appalling treatment of the Hillsborough families didn't happen in isolation. As we've heard, from the contaminated blood scandal to Grenfell, it is part of a problem of failure and cover-up. So when will the government finally listen to calls for the Hillsborough law, and will the Minister back my honourable friend's public advocate bill so that the scales can be levelled for justice in favour of bereaved families?
Well, we will be bringing forward the full response as quickly as possible. That is important, as members on both sides have clearly pointed out. In relation to the Hillsborough law, again, that will be included in the response, but we have already, via the Professional Standards of Policing in 2020, which is statutory, it was done by regulations, have already introduced this duty of cooperation in relation to inquiries, which is one of the most important elements of that. And the response on the independent public advocate, which is also important, will happen as quickly as possible. The MOJ are working on it actively right now.
Secretary Joe.
Mr Deputy Speaker, it's not good enough. First of all, my right honourable friend criticises his immediate predecessor, the member for Corby, who I understand really was trying to get to grips with this issue, and then he fails to explain why the government is blocking this legislative vehicle for implementing the independent public advocate? Because what's going to happen is that at the end of the spring, the government's going to report, and then it's going to say it's going to take a long time to get any legislation. We've got a legislative opportunity before us. The debate began last July. Why doesn't the government agree to allow that bill to have a second reading this Friday?
Well, first of all, to be clear, I'm in no way criticising my immediate predecessor, who I think was only in post for a matter of 2 or 3 months. I'm most certainly not criticising him, for the record, and I frankly resent the insinuation that I was. In relation to the independent public advocate, the government are not blocking progress on the issue, but there is a process to go through to get cross-government agreement on this. The MOJ are working on it and will respond as quickly as possible.
Paula Barker.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And I'd like to place on my record my thanks to my honourable friend from West Derby for securing this debate, and pay tribute as well to the work that my right honourable friend, the member for Garston and Halewood, has done, and the right honourable lady for Maidenhead. And it's a pleasure to follow the honourable gentleman as well. I think that's something I never thought I'd say in this chamber, Mr Deputy Speaker. But after 34 long years, the police finally acknowledged what every decent Scouser and every decent person in this country knew. A failure in policing was the main cause of the tragedy that saw the death of 97 innocent men, women and children. Our city has never given up the fight for truth, justice and accountability. I've heard nothing from the Minister at the dispatch box today to say why there has been 5 long years that the government has not responded to the report. The Minister has the ideal opportunity this Friday to back my honourable friend's bill, the duty of candour. We don't want to hear the reasons why it can't be done, or we don't want to hear that something will be brought forward in the spring. You have an ideal opportunity to back this bill on Friday. So the first question is, will you? And if you won't, then why not? And then the second thing I just wanted to place on record, Mr Deputy Speaker, is the Secretary of Safer Education, herself a Scouser, did the media round today, and on BBC Radio 4, she said there had been no government response to Bishop James Jones' Hillsborough report because of ongoing criminal trials. Well, the last trial finished in May 2021, and the police conduct investigation is ongoing. But does the Minister agree with me that we have to be very careful, after all the smears, after all the lies, after 34 years, that government ministers have a responsibility to ensure that what they say on the media round is truthful?
Okay, well, as I've said earlier, a number of things have been done in the last few years to address the issues that have been raised. Not comprehensively, not everything, but a number of things have been done. The professional standards around duty of cooperation, the pathology review, consulting on retaining documents, which was another recommendation, the consultation on the IPA, the removal of means testing for exceptional case funding for bereaved families at inquest. All of those things have been done. On the IPA, that is a Ministry of Justice lead. They are working on it, and I can't speak for them, but I can say they're working actively on it. In relation to the delay, I think the position is, as I set out earlier, between 2017 and May of 2021, there were ongoing legal proceedings, as the Honourable Lady just said. For the last 18 to 21 months, that has not been the case, and we do need to get on quickly and bring this full government response forward, which is what I'm going to make sure happens.
Order, if everybody could resume their seats. So because of the nature of this urgent question, I am giving a bit more latitude on the length of questions, but please help me by trying to focus as quickly as you can on the question at hand. Alice McGunn.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. My constituents have waited long enough.
Absolutely.
And that was true last month when the Secretary of State for Justice gave me the same pathetic response. I am afraid, Mr Deputy Speaker, I've concluded that the Minister doesn't know very much about this issue, because it's not an issue that just affects Merseyside, it's about the whole country, and it is not, as people have said, something that is just about football or Hillsborough. It affects people who have suffered because of Grenfell, contaminated blood, and a whole host of issues where the state has tried to protect itself instead of putting the interests of the citizen first. I want a straightforward yes or no answer. When my friend, the member for Garston's bill, comes before this House on Friday, is the government going to block it, yes or no?
Well, I have already explained a number of things the government has done in the last few years to address the issues. I'm going to address the issues raised by the Bishop's inquiry, including the duty of candour on police in relation to inquiries which was done in 2020. On the question of the independent public advocate, I've been asked this question several times, and I've given the same answer. And I've given the same answer to each patient. This is a Ministry of Justice, not Home Office lead. It is with the Ministry of Justice. They are actively considering it, and they will respond very shortly. I can't speak for another minister's responsibility. It is with them. They will respond very, very shortly.
Mick Ridley.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And can I commend my colleague from West Derby for getting this debate this afternoon. More than 30 years after Hillsborough disaster and more than 5 years after the publication of the Bishop Jones report, the National Police Chiefs Council and the College of Policing have finally apologised for what they have described as decades of deflection and denial. For many of my constituents who still homes about that terrible day, that's too little, too late. Does the Minister agree with me that while plans to revise the Police Code of Ethics are welcome, a new duty of candour for the public authorities must have statutory footing so that no family ever again has to struggle for truth and justice as the Hillsborough families have so for many decades?
Well, a duty of cooperation for the police in relation to inquiries was set out in the Professional Standards for Policing in 2020 in relation to the wider duty of candour that was referred to, I think, in Point of Learning 14 in the Bishop's report, and we'll be responding to that along with everything else very shortly.
Andrew Regal.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. The Minister speaks not only for his department from that dispatch box, but he speaks for the entire government, and I would have expected him to know what the Ministry of Justice's approach to my honourable friend and sister's bill on Friday would be before he came here. So will he at least say from the dispatch box that he's going to leave here and he's going to go to the Ministry of Justice and he's going to get permission from them to ensure that my honourable friend and sister's bill on Friday, which will introduce a public advocate, will be let into committee and not blocked, so that the clauses that the Ministry of Justice are currently drafting can be incorporated into her bill when it's in committee. We have a legislative vehicle. We could do it now, and he could enhance his reputation.
I would be very happy to convey her request to my Ministry of Justice colleagues.
Johnson.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'd like to send my support and respect for all the family, friends who have fought for justice for the victims of Hillsborough. The government have said they will respond in due course, and today we've heard it might be spring, but it could be any time soon. The Labour Party has pledged a new Hillsborough law, so can the Minister, without looking at his notes today, commit to supporting my honourable friend's bill and supporting an independent public advocate?
Well, I've just responded on the public advocate point. On the duty of candour point, which is a different point, the Hillsborough law point, which is a different point, and we'll respond to that and the recommendation in Point of Learning 14 with the rest of it. But as I've said quite a few times already, we have already, on a statutory basis, changed and updated the professional standards for policing to include a duty to cooperate with inquiries imposed on the police.
Margaret Greenwood.
I'd like to pay tribute to everybody who has campaigned for justice for the 97. I was a young school teacher at the time when Hillsborough happened in Liverpool, working in Liverpool, and I remember how traumatised the children were the following Monday and in subsequent weeks and months. I'd pay tribute to my friend, the honourable member for West Derby, on securing this debate. I hear what the Minister's saying about a Hillsborough law, but could he express to us whether, in principle, he agrees that we should have a Hillsborough law that would create a new legal duty of candour on public authorities and officials, not just the police, but all public authorities and officials, and that would ensure victims of disasters or state-related deaths are entitled to parity of legal representation during inquests and inquiries?
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her question, particularly given that she was, as actually so many other people here, have been affected personally by that tragedy. It's touched an extraordinary number of lives in very many different ways, including hers. Look, we'll respond fully when we reply to the Bishop's report. I want to make sure that happens as quickly as possible. It is very important that public bodies do respond quickly, openly, honestly, with integrity, that they don't try and cover things up, as obviously happened in this terrible case. We all have a shared interest in making sure that that never happens again.
Mr. Matters.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Can I thank my honourable friend, the member for Liverpool West Derby, for securing this urgent question? But the truth is, he shouldn't have had to do it. As soon as the police made the apology, there should have been a government statement about this, and it should have been the Home Secretary giving that statement. I think, I'm afraid, this shows, or it gives the impression that this just isn't a priority, which, given the history of this, is completely unforgivable. So, following on from the question from my honourable friend, the member for Halton, can I suggest to the Minister that he goes back and speaks to the Home Secretary this afternoon, expresses in the most strong terms that it would be very sensible for her to come back at the next opportunity with a concrete date by which the government will respond to the Bishop's report.
Well, the Home Secretary did, of course, reference this issue in yesterday's debate during her speech. I think it was in response to an intervention. So, to be fair to the Home Secretary, she did address this in the House as recently as yesterday. But yes, I can assure the honourable gentleman that this will be the subject, well, it is already the subject of urgent discussion. I want to see action on this as quickly as he and others do, and I'm committed to making sure that happens.
Clive Betts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As someone who was present at Hillsborough on that terrible day and was leader of the council, can I just echo comments made by members opposite? First of all, about the incredible generosity and warmth of Sheffield residents around the ground, who welcomed very distraught people into their homes and gave them whatever help they could. And secondly, with regard to the honourable member for Harrow, he's right. The South Yorkshire Police are accountable for what they've done. Probably haven't been accountable enough, but they had enormous failings there. But there's also failings to recognise that the circumstances changed with cages being put round grounds. As Lord Justice Taylor recommended in his report, those cages had to be taken down because they were actually making so many grounds unsafe in this country, because essentially they were put there to treat every football fan as a hooligan without any thought to spectator safety, and we ought to learn some lessons from that as well. Could I just say now to the Minister, when eventually the government produces its report, will it not merely give us some warm words and commitments, but say how it's going to ensure that every single police force in the country abides by the recommendations in this report and implements them in full?
Yeah. Well, look, I first of all, thank the gentleman for his question. Obviously, he, like so many others in this chamber today and across the country, was personally affected by this, and indeed in his case was actually present. I completely agree with the points he made about the caging. As I said, as a football fan myself, I take my son to Crystal Palace, and the idea of people being caged in is completely wrong, as he just himself said. And in answer to his direct question, yes, when this response comes to the report, which will be soon, as I say, it is important to make sure that it has teeth, and it's not just warm words. It does actually have biting and binding effect, and I'm confident that it will do so in the way that he asked.
Jill Finesse.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and may I thank the member for West Derby for bringing this to this chamber. Like many others, I have never forgotten that day. I lived just around the corner from the football ground. I saw young people queuing outside phone boxes, probably 50 of them, with not one word being spoken. They were so traumatised. I've just never ever seen anything like that before. There were young people trembling round the streets in my area,
And yes, lots of us did go out to support them because that's what we do in Sheffield. And none of us have ever forgotten that tragic day, let alone the travesty of justice that has followed. The Hillsborough disaster will live long in the memory of people in my constituency, but it is completely unacceptable that more than 30 years on, 97 families are still waiting for justice and assurances that this can never happen again. It would seem to me to show those families the respect that they deserve, that the Minister should do exactly what my friend over here has asked for, and for the government to support the bill, which will be coming to this very chamber on Friday, so that we can show the families the respect that they deserve and that they have not received until now.
Well, I think a lot has been done already, as I've set out, to address many of the issues that the Bishop raised in his report. And I've gone through them previously, but it includes critically those professional standards for policing, the removal of the means test on exceptional case funding, and many other things as well that I've set out before and won't repeat again. We do want to honour those families by responding in full. We do want to make sure this can never happen again. I've already committed to raising this IPA point with Ministry of Justice colleagues, which I will do straight away. And I hope by the actions that have been taken already, and by the response we're going to bring forward as quickly as possible, we will show to the families of those who suffered from this appalling tragedy that the government and indeed the whole House are with them and want to make sure that no one has to go through what they went through.
Stephanie Peacock.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I don't think the government's response to this is acceptable, and I don't think the Minister's response is. He can read the same thing again and again. He's simply not answering the question. Why will the government not back the bill on Friday? And I'd like to press him further on the Hillsborough law. The government have access to a blank cheque for legal representation, and yet victims have to navigate an often alien and complex system to access limited legal aid. So does the Minister agree that victims should have access to public money on the same terms as the state does for legal representation during inquests and inquiries?
Yeah, look, that is an important issue. It was one of the points that the Bishop raised in his report, which we'll be responding to. But we have already taken action in this area by removing the means test for exceptional case funding at inquests for the reasons that she just set out.
Clive Rappert.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I have to say, the fact that the Home Secretary didn't think that this was a priority to be here answering this urgent question is a complete disgrace and yet another snub to the families of the Hillsborough 97.
Disgraceful.
We know what's going to happen on Friday. The bill of my right honourable friend is number 10 on the order paper. The whips will sit over there and anonymously shout object when that bill is read out, unless the government changes its position. We need no further debate on this issue. We can get this into committee and we can debate it line by line and we can get this legislation through. There's a vehicle for doing it right here and right now in front of this House, and it will be forever for the condemnation of this government if they do not take that opportunity.
Well, look, as I said, the Home Secretary did speak to this issue in the House yesterday when she was asked about it. And in relation to the Honourable Members' Private Members' Bill due for consideration on Friday, I've already committed to communicate with my Ministry of Justice colleagues on this topic, which I will do.
Jamie Stone.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I think that any indication of obfuscation is dangerous for the government. Look, we must have a Hillsborough law. We must have a report in full as soon as possible. But I want to make this point, Mr Deputy Speaker, that a functioning democracy depends on public trust in the police forces. Without that, the democracy itself is undermined. And I think I want a word of recognition from the Minister that this is a dangerous situation. We've got to put this right, and we've got to make sure that the general public, our voters, the people of the United Kingdom, have proper faith in their police forces. And right now, that's been damaged by all that we've seen.
Minister.
Well, I think the Honourable Gentleman does raise a valid point. Policing takes place by consent, and it is important the public have confidence in the police force. I think That is why the apology by the police yesterday and the acknowledgement of the terrible, terrible mistakes and wrongdoings all those years ago was right, and not just all those years ago, but in the years that followed as well. So I think that is important. They have committed to change their own code of ethics, I think reflecting the point the Honourable Gentleman just made, to build trust in policing. Of course, there have been some other issues we've debated in this House over the last 2 or 3 months around vetting, where action is being taken as well. We're looking to review the way that dismissals happen in the police, either for misconduct or underperformance, to allow chief constables to more readily remove officers guilty of misconduct or indeed of poor performance more generally. So I do agree with the point he makes, and action is underway. I'll just finish answering the question, Mr. Deputy Speaker, by saying that despite the points that he's raised and other points that we've debated in this House over the last few months, the vast majority of police officers are dedicated, hard-working, decent people who put themselves in danger for our safety. But where there are failings, terrible failings, as in this case and some others that we've debated recently, it is critical robust action is taken, because without public confidence we can't have an effective police force.
Neil Griffith.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Well, we absolutely need a Hillsborough law, but we hear that all police forces in England and Wales have signed the Charter for Families Bereaved through Public Tragedy. But the Minister should not be surprised if that has been met with some cynicism. So, to prevent those being just empty words, what steps is the Minister taking to ensure that all forces are fully trained and regularly updated on the requirements of the Charter, and to ensure that they implement the Charter in full if sadly dealing with any future tragedy?
Yeah, well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her question, which is a good one, because with these charters and codes and everything else, whether it's in this context or others, they're only as good as their implementation. So the College of Policing, and in particular Chief Constable Andy Marsh, who leads the College of Policing, has made clear that implementation of that will be a topic of training across all 43 police forces, and I would moreover expect Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary, Fire and Rescue Services to make sure that is something they look at when they conduct their regular PEEL inspections, and I'd be very happy to make sure I raise that next time I see Andy Cook, who is the Chief Inspector, to make sure he is keeping an eye on this issue. The Honourable Lady raises a very good point, and I will take it away.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Honourable Gentleman for Liverpool West Derby, as always, for being consistently bringing this matter to the fore, and others in the side of the chamber who have consistently done likewise. The Minister will be aware that no words or amount of money can bring back a loved one or soothe the grief of loss. However, the Minister will also know that for some people, full accountability and openness can help people to move on. So does the Minister really believe that this is being achieved, and would the Minister consider implementing and legislating on the proposals from the 2017 Jones report as a signal that changes will be made to prevent this ever happening again?
Yeah. Well, look, I think closure for victims and victims' families, rather, through openness is critically important. And I think the Bishop's report was an important part of that, as were the various inquiries that happened in the aftermath. So, look, we're going to respond in full. And there were, I think, 25 points of learning, some of which address the issues that he just quite rightly spoke to. And when we respond in full to the Bishop's report, those issues will be addressed. And I'll just repeat in closing, Mr Deputy Speaker, I want to see this happen as quickly as possible. Members on both sides have made very clear the House's expectation that it happens as quickly as possible. And I'll make sure that it's my duty to ensure that it does.
I'd like to thank Ian Byrne for his urgent question today, and to all of those who have taken part today, and the Minister for responding to questions for over 50 minutes. We'll just move on now. Order. Statement on the Environmental Improvement Plan. Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And it's with permission I'd like to update the House on the next steps that this government is taking to help nature recover through our new Environmental Improvement Plan. This is a delivery plan setting out how we will achieve our ambitious, stretching environmental targets, the most critical of which is to halt the decline of nature by the end of this decade. We can and must achieve this both here in the UK and globally. But we are already underway. In this government's first 100 days, we've already delivered legally binding targets to halt nature's decline, clean up our air and rivers and support a circular economy, played an instrumental role in the new global agreement for nature at the UN Nature Summit, COP15, enacted the legal duty on government, national and local, on considering biodiversity, published our environmental principles policy statement, set out in detail our transformational farming schemes with the full range of actions we will pay farmers and land managers to do to restore nature. Announced we will ban the most commonly littered single-use plastic items from October 2023. Agreed to enact mandatory sustainable urban drainage systems for new development, which will reduce the risk of surface water flooding and pollution. Put in place the plant biosecurity strategy for Great Britain, a 5-year vision for plant health to protect native species, and plants providing an annual value of £15.7 billion to the UK, and agreed with the devolved administrations our approach to managing fisheries. And, Mr Deputy Speaker, there is much more I can add. Nature is a crucial part of our island story and our shared future. We know what is special with our rare habitats, our iconic species, and we also know the pressures it is under. We rely on our natural capital for a secure supply of food, for clean air and for clean water, as well as for leisure and genuine joy. However, nature has been taken for granted for too long, used freely as a resource, with little thought for the consequences. We have to reverse that and respect nature. 70 years ago, people were waking up to the devastation of the Great Flood of 1953, when over 300 people had died, reminding us that the full force of nature can bring us challenges. We took action then, and it's why we've continued to invest billions of pounds in protecting people's homes and to better protect more than 100,000 local businesses and safeguard around 100,000 jobs. Yet nature can help us tackle some of our great challenges as well, and so we need to help protect nature too. Undoubtedly and understandably, the pandemic set us back in some areas as we responded to the emergency at hand. But a silver lining to that experience, if any is to be had, was the opportunity for us to reconnect with nature, and I'm particularly pleased by our pledge in this plan to bring access to a green or blue space within 15 minutes walk of everyone's homes, whether that be parks, canals, rivers, countryside or the coast. Our focus is picking up the pace and scaling up at home and around the world, and that is why we are putting nature at the top of the international agenda as well. We brought nature into the heart of our collective response to climate change under our presidency of COP26 in Glasgow. At COP27, the Prime Minister said there is no solution to climate change without protecting and restoring nature. And the House may have heard me before extol the marvel of mangroves as the ultimate example of how investing in nature is an essential, effective and cost-effective way to take on a multitude of challenges. And the key achievement of 2022 was the agreement reached at the UN Nature Summit, the CBD COP15 in Montreal. But to level with the House, there is much, much more to do to restore the natural world. And some of these challenges are not always so easy or so quick to fix as we might all hope. Yet I can assure you that with our new legal duty to consider biodiversity, guided by our environmental principles policy, we are embedding nature in the heart of every decision that government will take for the long haul. We have a plan for the whole of government to support this national endeavour. We've already started the journey with a great many improvements. We're replacing the EU's bureaucratic common agricultural policy that did so little for farmers or nature, and rewarding our farmers for taking action to help nature retain and regain good health, reduce emissions, and produce food sustainably. Those things are absolutely symbiotic, and we are leading the way in making this essential transition. We have cleaner air, with major decreases in all 5 major pollutants. Emissions of fine particulate matter, PM2.5, the most damaging pollutant to human health, decreased by 18% between 2010 and 2020. But I want our air to be even cleaner, and that's why we are working with farmers to tackle ammonia emissions. And while councils will ask for a lot of powers, I need them to use the powers they already have, including on other items like tackling litter and fly tipping as well, rather than just asking for more. I will be publishing what they are doing and seeking to share best practice across the country. We are accelerating the rate of tree planting. The Forestry Commission will start growing their estate and increase planting, fulfilling their original statutory obligation to help rejuvenate the forestry and timber industry. We strengthen the financial support through our environmental land management schemes, and we will continue to promote urban tree planting so children everywhere can enjoy their local woods. Our water bodies regarding chemical status. While the science and modelling is clear, it will take decades for those to recover and heal completely. We are keeping spotlight on water quality and getting industry to clean up its act. We are restoring 400 miles of river through the first round of landscape recovery projects and establishing 3,000 hectares of new woodlands along England's rivers, as well as doubling funding available for the catchment sensitive farming programme to £30 million in each of the next 3 years to cover all farmland in England. We've already seen a huge improvement in our bathing waters. Last year, nearly 3 in 4 beaches were deemed excellent, when it was only about half back in 2010. And I can tell people that I share their concern about the sewage in our waters. That is why we, the Conservative government, turned on the monitoring, and it's why we are holding industry to account on fixing this. Yeah. Through our storm overflows discharge reduction plan, we are requiring water companies to deliver their largest ever environmental infrastructure investment, estimated £56 billion of capital investment over 25 years, and we have set clear expectations on improvements on which we will track performance. The next formal review will be in 2027, so if we can go further and faster, then that's exactly what we will do. Of course, all this remains an international endeavour as well. We have a globally recognised track of record of action, helping communities protect and restore their national treasures. And reinforced by our science expertise and financial support, we are helping nature around the world. That is the right thing to do, and it's absolutely in our interests as well. So having committed to doubling UK international climate finance to £11.6 billion and to spending at least £3 billion of that on nature, we are building on decades of action, backing efforts to take on the whole host of threats that now face the world's flora and fauna well beyond climate change alone. We're doing that through the Blue Belt programme, protecting an area of ocean larger than India around our biodiverse overseas territories, our world-renowned £39 million Darwin Initiative, and the Illegal Wildlife Trade Challenge Fund. We are ploughing all that expertise and experience into our newly established £500 million Blue Planet Fund and our £100 million Biodiverse Landscapes Fund to help some of the world's poorest and most vulnerable communities restore, protect, and connect globally important but fragile habitats. I'm so proud that we are, as the UK, is leading, co-leading and actively supporting the global coalitions that are committed to securing the maximum possible ambition and achieving the greatest possible impact on everything from taking on the scourge of illegal, unregulated and unreported fishing to persuading countries to agree a new legally binding global treaty to end plastic pollution by 2040, or supporting efforts to establish a global gold standard for taking nature into account across our economies. Mr Deputy Speaker, I could spend hours talking about nature, about our mission, about what we've already achieved, and as a Member of Parliament for Suffolk Coastal, I am blessed to represent a very special part of our country with many precious habitats and protected sites on land and offshore. And I always said it felt like I'd had 6 years of a perfect apprenticeship before I became the Environment Minister in 2016. Mr Deputy Speaker, there are many more parts to the plan that we published yesterday. I recognise we have work to do, and our aim is to catalyse action across government, across the economy and across the country, with the whole DEFRA family, our agencies, including Natural England, the Environment Agency, the Animal and Plant Health Agency, delivery partners and regulators, the whole of government, and indeed individuals, communities and businesses, from farms to finance, all working together to bring this to life. Nature needs us to accelerate and scale up our help if we want to enjoy nature and have its help for generations to come. And together, Mr Deputy Speaker, we can achieve it. Whether you live in a city or a town, in the countryside or on the coast, we all have a part to play in this truly national endeavour and the decade of global action that we need now to see this through. And I commend this statement to the House.
Alex Sobel.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I thank the Secretary of State for advance sight of her statement. I'm pleased that on this occasion we're actually getting an oral statement rather than DEFRA Minister having to be dragged to the House for an urgent question or sneaking something important out as a written statement. Even on this occasion, she made a speech announcing this plan outside this House yesterday. My honourable friend, the Shadow Secretary of State, is unfortunately unable to be here today as a pre-arranged medical appointment, but I'm glad the Secretary of State is here to be held accountable, though I do feel it must be difficult for her to continue to try to defend her department's record. Mr Deputy Speaker, we have a Conservative government that is big on promises, but little on delivery. The proof is in the pudding, and the Secretary of State's own appalling environmental track record speaks volumes. As Water Minister, she presided over a new sewage spill every 4 minutes, and 321 years' worth of sewage was spilt in just 3 years. On top of that, she cut the resources of regulators there to protect the environment by a third, and her 3 months as Environment Secretary haven't been any better. First, she broke her own statutory deadline for publishing environmental targets. Then she told Parliament that meeting polluting water bosses is not a priority, before announcing measures that inflict more sewage dumping and toxic air on our country. Well, she can correct the record when she responds. Even the department's own regulator, the Office for Environmental Protection, gave the government nil point on its 25-year environment goals. On chemicals, the government is missing in action. Their UK REACH system is evidently not working properly. Never mind Dr. Doolittle, it's Dr. Damage a lot. And let's look at this latest plan. I have questions. Why will our sites of special scientific interest, which have been so neglected, not be assessed for another 5 years until 2028? Why is there no mention of reintroducing species to help nature recovery, aid flood management and increase pollination? And does she agree that she's betting the house on elms by relying totally on take-up and farmer cooperation? The Secretary of State had the opportunity to come to Parliament or to outline at the NFU Oxford conference that she's on the side of farming communities, but she's failed to do so. Where is she on the Dartmoor issue and the increasing threat to access to nature? And how does she plan to deal with the 1,781 retained EU environmental regulations we're going to have to deal with this year? Trust is an important word in politics, and it's clear there's very little trust in this government to get anything done. Actions speak louder than words. The Environmental Improvement Plan is full of praise for action the government has taken since 2018 to deliver improvements in our air quality, but light on detail around the action it will take over the next 5 years to deliver change. Then that's why when Labour plans to introduce a standalone, ambitious and effective comprehensive Clean Air Act. It will do what the Minister won't. It will save lives, save money and clean our air. Labour expand meaningful access to nature and clean up the Tory sewage scandal. We will hold water bosses to account, not just use lip service, and ensure regulators can properly enforce the rules. This plan, which was long in gestation, still has glaring omissions, and there is no evidence as to how it will be delivered. To quote Tony Juniper, the chair of Natural England, at the plan's launch yesterday, it is now all about delivery. Yet DEFRA has continually failed to deliver. How can we trust this failed government to deliver for our natural environment? Only Labour will deliver a fairer, greener future. Thank you.
Secretary of State.
Well, Mr. Speaker, what can I say? I'm not sure how much that deserves a response, but in respect to the House, I think that it's important to make sure these long-term environmental plans are there. We've put in place legislation that we would refresh this every 5 years. That's exactly what we've done. And when we're talking about track records, of course, Labour government never did anything about sewage, didn't know anything about it, did nothing. And so I'm used to the usual spew coming out of the Labour front bench on the other side, and frankly, it's not good enough. So, in terms of, let's just go through some of the questions where he wanted some updates. So in terms of chemicals, we still have the system in place, as is set out in the Environmental Improvement Plan. We'll be publishing a chemical strategy this year. In terms of SSSIs, I'm very conscious about the risks that we have there, and there are varieties around the country on what is going on. And that is why I've asked for an individual plan for every single SSSI to be put in place. So Natural England will be going through, making the assessments of what is there and what needs to be done, and we will get on with it. In terms of elms, I think it's been transformational. And this is a journey for the farming industry, who are the original friends of the earth, who are the people who want a very special countryside, and that's why we brought forward measures, as my right honourable friend laid out to the House last week, when he came to talk about this transition. And indeed, we will be working with farmers, and I'm at the NFU conference next month. There hasn't been an NFU conference since I've been in government, and as a consequence, we continue to make sure that we continue to speak to farmers and indeed other places. In terms of the retained EU laws, well, as I've already said to Parliament, the approach that we've set out, where there's legislation that's superfluous, we will get rid of that. We will be carefully looking at all. We'll be carefully looking at all the regulations that are in place, and that's what we're going through. And it seems to escape the front bench's attention that, of course, we'd already repealed 146 regulations and the new notice. So there we go. But meantime, we do want to make sure that we are holding different people to account. But there is an individual endeavour, a local endeavour, a national endeavour. That's why things like the Biodiversity Net Gain, which will be coming into effect later this year, will start to help in terms of local nature recovery strategies. It's why we have announced extra funding, more projects that are to have second rounds of things like landscape recovery. In terms of species reintroductions, there are species being reintroduced, and that is happening in different parts of the country. So I have to say, I'm very pleased that we published our environmental improvement plan. I think that it shows a clear path on how we will get that nature recovery, recognising this has been going on for centuries. I'm delighted, finally, this UK government, we should be proud of getting nature very much at the forefront of international thinking. We're leading the way. We're also doing our bit around the world. And I can honestly say that I trust it, that we will continue to be the Conservative Party because we believe in conservation of our precious land.
Robert Goodwill.
Thank you. Goal 5 of the plan aims at eliminating waste, and whilst we have made great progress in, for example, phasing out single-use plastics, in substituting more sustainable materials in packaging for foods for plastic, the sad fact remains that whilst our local authorities are very good at collecting waste, the majority of our plastic waste is exported overseas. So will the Secretary of State look at two things she could do to improve that situation? Firstly, could she look at the operation of extended producer responsibility, maybe look at what they're doing in Belgium to make sure that that works with industry to incentivise investment in our plastic waste recycling here? And secondly, would she look at setting a date, as my committee has suggested, for the phase-out, for the elimination of exports of plastic waste to countries like Turkey, where their standards are not as good as ours?
Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, I think in terms of exports of plastics, it's been, we've recognised and we want to make sure that we are not exporting to, I think it's non-OECD countries. But that doesn't give a blank cheque to when exports happen to member countries of the OECD. And that's why we have a rigorous process in place. But we will continue to investigate through the Environment Agency where issues arise and get them fixed. In terms of thinking more broadly, of course, one of our, I think, sadnesses during COVID was the, in effect, explosion of single-use plastic and the throwaway elements, which were necessary for public health. But it also, we had a reduction in our recycling rate. So we do want to turn that around, and that's why we'll continue to work on the important EPR reforms to which he refers.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. At yesterday's launch of the plan, the Secretary of State claimed, and I quote, that we're embedding nature in the heart of every decision the government will take. That is a very worthy aim. But how on earth does it square with the actual action we see from her department? Just last week, her department gave the green light to an authorisation of the pesticide neonicotinoids, which we know kills bees. Don't tell us that this was just an emergency authorisation. This is the third year in a row that her department has actually ignored their own expert committee on this issue. This is now becoming routine. So how can she give us reassurance that when she says words like we're going to put nature at the heart of all our environment policy making, she actually means it? Where is the consistency?
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for that question. In terms of we commence the legal duty on, in effectively, public authorities, national and local government to consider biodiversity from the 1st of January. And that is already in place. In terms of the environmental principles policy statement that was published yesterday, it will now take some time for government to bring that in, and it will come into effect formally from the 1st of November of this year. And in terms of the decision, I think my right honourable friend as Farming Minister, went through this in some considerable detail in the consideration. And every year, if an application is made, that has to be considered separately. My understanding from what particularly happened during that process, in discussion with our Chief Scientific Advisor, we increased the threat. That is not true. So in terms of that aspect, we increased the threshold for usage. We also set a bar to be decided by the Rothamsted Institute on how much of the crop is at risk. And it's only in certain circumstances when those are reached that the particular neonicotinoid can be applied to the seed. And further elements of strengthening this is that then there will be a prohibition on the planting of flowering crops. I think it's for 36 months or maybe 32 months. But certainly between 2 and 3 years after their usage. So there's been very careful consideration given, and that is why we continue to consider these applications with a great deal of care. And I'm very conscious that in terms of what we're trying to do through the Sustainable Farming Initiative, for example, we've brought forward what will be eligible for grants on the integrated pest management, so that we can continue to try and accelerate the way from using pesticides routinely.
Philip Dunn. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Could I warmly welcome the incredible amount of work that has gone into this 5-yearly environmental improvement plan by the Secretary of State and her team, fresh into post. This is a holistic, comprehensive update of the 25-year environment plan and introducing for the first time a whole slew of targets and interim targets on the journey to get to where we wish to get to in the next 20 years. And in particular, can I ask her to take this opportunity in looking at Goal 3 for clean and plentiful water, which has been a topic of great interest to members across this House, for her to help those members on the opposite side who seem to have deliberately confused the issue of what we voted for in this House in trying to introduce targets, in particular in connection with the persistent chemicals which are banned substances for use such as flame retardants, but exist in sediments on our riverbeds and other places and are being released through the natural process of decay. It is not something that this House has voted to continue for 40 years, as some members opposite have tendaciously claimed.
Well, I think I'd like to thank my right honourable friend for that. He's absolutely right to say a lot of effort has gone into this review, quite rightly, because nature matters so much, not just to those of us who have a passion for it, because it's absolute critical importance to the global web of life. So in terms of thinking about other issues he's raised, I mean, it's not the first time that Liberal Democrats have put stuff out and it's a complete load of whatever, the proverbial. But can I just point out to the House a little bit more broadly about the chemical status of water? So in terms of what happened during in the last decade is that while we were still a member of the European Union, what then happened is we added a particular type of chemical to be considered in the chemical status of water bodies. So before that, I think we were nearly complete in every water body having good chemical status. When that came in, and that's the things like mercury and other elements like that, none of our water bodies were in good status. And that's exactly the same thing that happened to countries like Germany and others. And it's a natural process that will now need for nature to heal and recover until we get that status change. So on the other aspects that are more within our control, which is why we've pressed the case and made sure through our different strategic policy statements, through the WINEX and other aspects like that, we're getting water companies to really tighten up and clean up the wastewater treatments.
Geraint Davis.
Mr Deputy Speaker, yesterday I moved the Clean Air Bill, which would require us to reach World Health Organization air quality standards for PM 2.5 of 10 micrograms per cubic metre by 2030, in alignment with the ambition of the EU, and therefore it's achievable. Yet today, 5 years into the 25-year plan, she comes along on the 10th anniversary of Ella Kissimmee Deborah's death and extends that another 10 years to 2040.
How many thousands of extra avoidable lives will be lost due to that? And how many millions of children will have to go into hospital with asthma attacks because of that delay? And what will she do to bring forward that target to 2030 in alignment with the EU? If we were still in the EU, thousands would be saved, and she's ensuring that thousands instead will die.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure. I'm conscious of the passion of the honourable gentleman on this, and I know he's had a long-standing interest in air quality, as do I. I seem to recall when I was in the department first time, the focus was on NOx, because that was the legal breach we were in. We're not in any legal breach now. We're not in any legal breach now. That is not the case either, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And it was I pointed out to the various groups at that time, the thing that we should worry about is particulate matter 2.5, because it affects everybody. So in that regard, I have long been passionate, which is why, in post, we introduced a ban on the sale of smoky coal. It's why we've got rid of wet wood, or as best as we can, in that regard, because that was the principal source, increasingly, of what was happening in PM 2.5. Now, where we are today, as I said, I've said publicly, I would have loved for the target to be 2030, but the powers of the Environment Act require me to believe that they are achievable. And I'm very sad that in London in particular, we don't seem to be able to fix that problem. And a lot of the issues need to be addressed where it's 14 out of 21 London boroughs where we still have a problem. And that is why I'm very keen for the Mayor of London not to be doing all sorts of tokenistic things that really make marginal difference with his expansion of ULEZ, but about the councils using their powers, informing people so that we can really tackle that PM 2.5. And of course, if we can go quicker, the next time we review the targets, then I'll make sure they're changed.
Wigan.
Can I just say a huge thank you to my right honourable friend and extend a big, grateful Herefordshire hug to her for this excellent plan. Will she meet me to discuss the Environment Agency's permitting department, which I believe is struggling, and to discuss the River Lug and Wye, and how we're going to deliver through the work that farmers do?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for that. I'd be delighted to meet my friend. Hopefully I can bring along potentially the Farming Minister and the Water Minister, because I think this is a good example of where we need different agencies to come together, as well as our farmers, in thinking through about how we can improve capture of runoffs and other elements. And that is why also we've made sure that there is money available to farmers, for example, for slurry storage, so we can try and trap ammonia, as well as some of the other activities that they can undertake, and we can help them do the right thing.
Thank you. Clive Betts.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Just want to declare an interest. I'm a trustee of a small charity, Fields in Trust, that works with some local authorities in trying to achieve the target of no household being more than 15 minutes away from green space. Can I say to the Secretary of State, she said this was about the whole of government. Before Christmas, the Secretary of State for DLUC introduced consultation about changes to the National Planning Policy Framework, which required the 20 major urban areas in this country to have a 35% uplift to their house building targets. On the 9th of January, the Permanent Secretary and his officials came to the Select Committee, and Emran Mian, the Director for Regeneration, said that that uplift had been plucked out of thin air, that it didn't have to be followed if it meant building on the green belt, but if it meant building more homes on green spaces, the uplift would have to be implemented. So, if implementing that uplift, the 35%, authorities find that they cannot deliver the government's target of everyone being within 15 minutes of green space, do they follow the uplift or follow the aspiration on green space?
Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I hold the chairman of the Select Committee in high regard. We do need to build more homes in this country. He'll be aware of that. And while we want to prioritise, of course, brownfield sites, I'm also very conscious of some of the changes that may be needed in different parts of the country. And while I regret, of course, as Secretary of State for DEFRA, the loss of any good farmland to that, and there are already protections in place, and indeed my right honourable friend is, I think, further consulting on aspects of that. I think it's important that we can design in great green space access, and this might be something as simple as the community woods. I recall I grew up in Liverpool, so I was very aware of what was happening in the previous urgent question. But building those in, Liverpool City Council has got some of the best tree programmes in what they do, and I think that we can design with nature in mind, and that is indeed why aspects, things like biodiversity net gain, something this government has introduced, it will be coming into effect later this year. Those are the sorts of important changes that we can make in order to make sure that people do have access to green space.
Celine Saxby.
Mr Deputy Speaker, and I thank my right honourable friend for her statement. And as I've mentioned in this chamber before, in my North Devon constituency, we've already seen a dramatic reduction in the number of storm overflows that are released onto our beautiful beaches. Analysis has shown that the only way to completely eliminate sewage overflows is to dig up and replace 60,000 miles of old pipes with 2 separated systems, or build 40,000 Olympic swimming pools of storage. Does my right honourable friend know which option the Lib Dems are claiming that they would deliver?
Well, can I say to my honourable friend, my honourable friend is, a very good champion for her constituents and for nature. And so they should be. If you go to the beauty of Croy Beach, I recall going there before and doing aspects of litter pick and the joys that all that can bring in terms of the beauty of nature. She is right to champion improvements in what we're doing to sewage. But my honourable friend will know that, of course, quite often the Liberal Democrats will say one thing to get elected and do the complete opposite when in power.
Anna McMorran.
Government's own regulator, the Office of Environmental Protection, has found that this government is seriously failing on every one of its goals set out in its own 25-year environment plan. So what is the government going to do differently to deliver these commitments? Or is it yet just another government talking the rhetoric, meaningless words, and not delivering where it should be delivering?
Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, I recognise what the Honourable Lady has said, and I was actually disappointed by the OEP, given they put in their own statements as well that we were getting cleaner air, we were making progress on all these things. So I was a bit surprised by the headlines that came out of that. And of course, one of the issues, to some extent, of the goals, which are complementary goals, is targets hadn't been set at that point. So I'm very confident. This is a delivery plan. This is a delivery plan. I've already set out. Well, the Honourable Lady will be aware it is available. It was available yesterday. I'm conscious it doesn't cover Wales, where her constituency is. So I don't know when the Welsh Government or what they are doing in that regard. But I don't decry. This is a Parliament of the United Kingdom. This is a Parliament of the United Kingdom. So I'm very happy to take questions from Welsh MPs. I have already. But what I am keen to say, Mr Deputy Speaker, is that we have already delivered. I've already shared about how bathing water has got much cleaner under this administration. And we will continue to do a number of activities. And the thing that we have done and the Welsh Labour government has not done is transform the farming funding, which will move from making sure we have sustainable food production, but also that we will be protecting and enhancing the environment as well.
Damien Green.
Mr Deputy Speaker, there are very many farmers in my constituency who love the Kentish countryside and are proud to be custodians of it for this generation. At the same time, they have to run profitable businesses producing and selling good, healthy food. Can she assure me and them that the new scheme has enough strength behind it to enable them both to run viable businesses and to continue to protect and indeed enhance Kent's beautiful countryside?
Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I congratulate my right honourable friend. He's right to stand up for his farmers, the garden of our country and the producer of many fine foods fruits and, of course, wines as well. And in that regard, I would say that the amount of money being dedicated still into supporting our farmers and landowners is the same. I'm conscious that we're on this transition journey, and that's why I wanted to bring forward some of the opportunities for people to get funding from the government as we reduce the guaranteed basic BPS. And I think that we are in a good place, that farmers have a genuine menu from which to choose. And a lot of this was informed by a practising farmer, my right honourable friend, the Farming Minister, and that there will be opportunities for his farmers to be able to have a viable, sustainable, profitable business, as well as saving the planet.
Thank you,
Mr Deputy Speaker. Mr Deputy Speaker, as my honourable friend, the member for Cardiff Central, highlighted, the Office for Environmental Protection put out its report last week. And talked about the need to have a better alignment and coordination at all levels of government, local and national, with actions that extend beyond DEFRA. 2 years ago, the Public Accounts Committee published a report which her department agreed with, where we put that simply as a lack of clout across Whitehall. So further to the question from my honourable friend, the member for Sheffield South East, how is she going to make sure that these plans actually get delivered across Whitehall? Does she have the clout? And does she have the backing of the Treasury?
Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, it's the first time anyone's ever accused me of not having heft. But what I will say is that since I think her report came out, which I'm not aware of course we've passed the Environment Act, and one of those was about putting in the biodiversity duty, which we've commenced from the 1st of January. We have set out the Environmental Principles Policy Statement, but she made a very important point. It's got to be done with local government, it's got to be done with individuals, it's got to be done with businesses too. And that is why I'm keen for councils to use the powers they've asked for in the past, and yet they're still not using. And it's for them to decide with the local nature recovery strategies how they can best make nature improvements. And there will, of course, we want to help them achieve the best outcomes they possibly can.
Teresa Villiers.
I welcome this hugely important plan for the potential it has to protect nature and the environment. Now we need to see it delivered, and with that in mind, can I urge the Secretary of State to make sure we're meeting our manifesto target of 30,000 hectares of tree planting every year as a crucial means to meet our target to halt species decline by 2030?
Well, my right honourable friend, of course, being a former Secretary of State, knows how important our department is in making sure that we are champions for nature, but also deliver for nature. So in that regard, we are trying to make sure that we increase the opportunities to plant trees. We've had the woodland creation offer already, and some of the changes that we're bringing through, as well as the targets that we've put in law, I think will help us accelerate that tree planting.
Richard Ford.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. These environmental targets will be a complete waste of paper if there are very few farmers left to put them into practice. Farmers have had their basic payment cut 5% in 2021, 20% in 2022, and will get the payment cut 35% later this year in 2023. Farmers are struggling to access schemes to supplement their income. They're struggling to meet the inflated costs of feed, of fuel, of fertiliser. I was walking on a lane in Devon a few weeks ago. A 4x4 came past, the window wound down, and the farmer said to me that, did I know that DEFRA, under this government, stands for the Department for the Extermination of Farmers? Can the Minister explain how the government will support those farmers to deliver the Environmental Improvement Plan who are being forced out of business?
Not surprised by the quality of that question, but look, the honourable gentleman represents a very rural constituency in Devon, and what I will say to him is he should see this transition in the farming to be a positive action about having sustainable production, but also about saving the planet too. It's absolutely vital that our farmers are supported to do that. And that is why we've continued the £2.4 billion of funding available. And yes, there is going to be a transition as the guaranteed payments will start to decrease. And what we'll be doing is able to target that money we pay the farmers for eco-services. And that is critical to making sure that they can have a sustainable business, but also the work that they do will be enhancing the nature which we all enjoy and which they need to make sure we have future harvests too.
Kelly Hughes.
Me? So, thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I did think. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And I would also very much like to congratulate the DEFRA team, actually, but particularly my right honourable friend for bringing forward the Environmental Improvement Plan, which is full of deliverable plans with real action. And as my honourable friend knows, I'm a passionate user of the River Medway in my constituency. I sail in it, I swim in it, and have the unfortunate of being living just not far from a storm overflow. So it was with great pleasure that because of her department's actions, 98% of all storm overflows on the River Medway are being monitored and tested regularly. So could my right honourable friend outline to me how further those actions that she has taken will reduce the sewage that is pumped into our river and some of those dangerous chemicals?
Well, my honourable friend is clearly a champion of her special part of Kent, and I think that the best way I can say this is a plan was set out, we've got the monitoring, we're not trying to hide anything, far from it. We've actually opened up the problem, and that is why we are having a laser-like focus in tackling that sewage, and it is imperative that we will be continuing to hold the water companies to account, and in that regard, the investment will start flowing, and that is all part of coming through in terms of aspects of the price review that's impending as well.
Karen McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I've had a pretty good read of the plan, and it's disappointing there's not really more about the urban environment in there and the contribution that can make, particularly in terms of the nature section. As the parliamentary species champion for the Swift, I'm very keen to see more Swift bricks installed in buildings. You know, you've said a lot about trees and hedgerows and so on, but when it comes to reversing the decline in Swifts, it's buildings that we need to look at. Is that something that the Minister can go away and look at and perhaps introduce, despite the fact that it's not in the plan?
Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm very aware of Swift boxes. Actually, in my constituency, there's been a successful awareness raising, and indeed, I think it's in guidance from the DLUC about aspects like that, about what can be done to make safe spaces for nature in our urban environments and in future buildings. So it is important, of course. We are not a department just for the countryside, far from it. We're here in a place that can touch everybody's heart when they're thinking of how they can and do reconnect with nature. But I will continue to try and make sure urban prominence is given. And I say that. I grew up in a city. Over 80% of people, of course, do live in urban settings. And that's one of the reasons why the pledge is very clear about access to a green or blue space within 15 minutes walk. And it's also why we will continue to get the focus on air quality, which is particularly prevalent, of course, in urban situations.
Andrew Jones.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Can I warmly welcome this statement? My right honourable friend made an important point that excellent bathing water quality beaches have increased from about half to nearly three-quarters. That's very positive. But 98% of our waters with bathing water status are coastal, and those with inland waters with that status are mainly lakes. So does my right honourable friend agree that improving river water quality is important as a priority too? And will she therefore back my campaign for bathing water quality status to be accredited on the River Nid at the Lido in Knaresborough?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right to say how important it is. It's not just about the coast side, and I think traditionally bathing water statistics has focused on coastal areas because that's where the majority of people go to go and enjoy that leisure, so that's why it's been vital there. And waters more broadly, of course, matter dramatically in terms of the quality, and I think of our chalk streams, which are so precious. And I'll tell the House a little anecdote about going to see the River Itchen, and the landowner in front of me started crying because they spotted a bottle of dog shampoo, and they said that person may not have realised, but they've just ruined the chemical status of this river for about the next 25 years by doing that act. So it won't have been done deliberately. So we need to make sure everybody is more aware of that, and that's why I understand why he's campaigning for his local river to be brought into the bathing water statistics, and I'm sure his case will be considered very carefully indeed.
Jim Shannon.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I thank the Secretary of State very much for her statement, and whilst I note that this environmental plan applies to England specifically, the protection of 30% of land and sea for our marine protected areas must equally apply to the Irish Sea area. And subsequently, Secretary of State, what discussions has taken place with the DAERA officials in Northern Ireland to ensure that the ball is not dropped by the Northern Ireland waters and that the protection is also extended right across? Thank you.
Well, the honourable gentleman raises a very strong point. In preparation for the CBD COP15 in Montreal, of course, it was bringing back together the four nations of the United Kingdom that we were proud to represent. We do have the Joint Nature JNCC, which is a body across there, and I think last year I was visiting with a different hat on Giant's Causeway, which is of course extraordinary. And we want to try and make sure there's more access in that regard to Northern Ireland. I know that's been an important part of discussions, but also we will continue to work closely with officials. Well, of course, we all want the executive to be reformed so we can really make progress in Northern Ireland as a fantastic part of the United Kingdom.
Anna Firth.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The quality of our water off the new city of Southend-on-Sea is fundamental, both to our world-famous cockle industry and our Blue Tits Chill swimming group that swim all the year round. So I absolutely welcome this statement today. But would my right honourable friend agree with me that claims by the parties opposite that members of this House have voted for 15 more years of sewage dumping are totally false? And a bit rich coming from Labour that ignored sewage discharges when they were in power, and the Lib Dems coalition Minister for Water who did nothing.
Well, my honourable friend has only been in the House a relatively short time, but she shows how savvy she is in standing up for her constituents in Southend. Yes, of course, where we identify issues, we put the spotlight on them, we try to fix them. That's what we do. We are Conservatives. We want to conserve. We want to enhance. And I can assure her that I will continue to support her in what she is trying to do for the great people of Southend and try and make sure our beaches are as clean as ever.
Simon Jupp.
Speaker, I warmly congratulate my right honourable friend and her team for this announcement of the plan today. Devon's farmers produce some of the best food and drink in the world. I should know I've sampled a fair bit of it. They are custodians of our countryside and have been for generations, and we owe them a debt of gratitude and certainty. Can my right honourable friend outline how this plan will help support our farmers to keep producing fantastic food across the South West?
Well, Mr Speaker, there is great food in a number of countries, and I don't want to come between the Devon and Cornish MPs about who has the right pasty or where cream should go on a scone. However, what I will say to my honourable friend, it is very important that we do involve farmers and landowners in trying to improve our nature. And by default, I think most of them are already doing that. But I'm very conscious of the challenges that they do face, and that is why my right honourable friend, the Farming Minister, has been very active on their issues that they have raised in a number of ways. But I'm convinced that what we are doing is, by what we did last week, opening up many more activities for which we will pay farmers to improve the quality of soil, other aspects about integrated pest management. We will be able to help farmers not only be more sustainable, but indeed have that extra benefit of making sure the quality of food in Devon is the best it can be.
I thank the Secretary of State and our honourable friend, the Environment Minister, for the tremendous hard work which they put into developing this world-leading environmental improvement plan. Local residents in the Kettering constituency are very keen to support any measures to protect, preserve or enhance our natural environment. Will she agree with me that A, nature has been neglected for far too long, B, environmental and agricultural policies were returned to this country as a result of Brexit, and C, she is drawing on B to fix A so that we can clean our waters, tackle air pollution and increase biodiversity?
My friend sums it up perfectly. So what we have been able to do by leaving the European Union is to remove ourselves from the constraints, the handcuffs of the common agricultural policy. And we've been able to develop a policy that will translate into, certainly in England, into making sure that we can have sustainable food production and also improve the environment. We also hope, with the Lords about to pass the gene editing bill, again another Brexit freedom that will allow us to develop aspects which, for example, will bring climate change resilient wheat. So again, we can use the best of technology and the freedoms in order to make sure we do what is right for the farmers and people of this country in making sure we have a healthy and wealthy farming community so that we can continue to enjoy all this fabulous produce for many generations to come.
Fuller.
In the decades going back to the Victorian era, I guess, when water companies were putting in their pipes, they didn't take action on the issue of sewage overflow. Perhaps they should have. In the 13 years the Labour government was in office, they took no action on sewage overflow.
Yeah, correct.
Perhaps they should have. This government is taking action on the issue of sewage overflow, but does my right honourable friend recognise that in doing so will cost tens of billions of pounds of investment, and therefore is it not right to work within the constructs of this environmental plan and other environmental plans to achieve that long-term change?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely spot on, and we identified the issue, and it was actually Lord Bennion in the other place, my honourable friend, right honourable friend Lord Bennion in the other place, who, when he was in DEFRA as a minister early on, he was the person who spotted it, got on with it, and that's what we are dealing with. And that's why the monitoring will be in place completely by the end, I think, of this year, so that we can have that laser-like focus on sorting out this unacceptable sewage problem. But he's also right to point out this is going to cost tens of billions of pounds. And some of what was being proposed before was going to cost hundreds of billions of pounds, which would have added at least £800 on people's water bills. And we have to have that balance, focusing where we can make the most impact right now, and that's what we will continue to do.
Pausey.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and may I draw attention to my entry in the Register of Members' Interests. The Secretary of State will know that the packaging sector and its customers welcomes the measures in the plan to reduce littering and to increase rates of recycling. But I wondered if she'd agree that they will be at their most effective if they are introduced consistently and at the same time across all countries within the UK.
Well, my honourable friend, I understand the point he is trying to make. I think that we have to make progress in this country. We are trying to get a consistency of recycling process alongside the introduction of the EPR, but it's a case that while there are many things on which we agree with other parts of the UK, we need to make sure we have a plan that will deliver what we've set in law in terms of our recycling targets, and that's why we will, of course, want to try and make this as straightforward for our manufacturers. We need to press on with the important targets that we have already passed into law in the last few days.
Alexander Stafford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I was pleased to see that in the Environmental Improvement Plan, the Lapwing Estate near Baltry on the border of Rother Valley was one of the case studies. This 5,000-acre piece of land will abate emissions, store carbon and produce food, and is, of course, funded partly by this government. Can the Secretary of State confirm they'll continue to fund such projects across South Yorkshire and in Rother Valley to secure our carbon and also our food supplies and supporting our local rural communities?
Well, indeed, there's a number of different funding streams, and our Nature for Climate Fund is a key element of that. But he'll be aware, of course, as we are making the transition on the environmental land management schemes, we'll continue to try and make sure that activities that are doing good things for the environment will be rewarded, and indeed we'll be going further in trying to give a premium where we have greater connectivity so that the opportunity there is even enhanced. This is a symbiotic relationship in terms of improving the quality of our land alongside, and that will have results in improving the biodiversity we all enjoy.
Apologies. In a moment. Apologies to Kelly Tolhurst, who I've known for years, but Kelly, who's a very popular hairdresser in my constituency of the River Valley, will be delighted with the publicity. Can I thank the Secretary of State for her statement today and responding to questions for well over 50 minutes. Point of order, Fleur Anderson.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker.
I seek your advice, Mr Deputy Speaker, on how my constituent, Mr Walker, can get a response for his pension credit application, which he made on the 13th of September last year, but has had no response, despite many follow-up calls and 3 complaints by his age-concerned caseworker. He's heard nothing from the Department for Work and Pensions. He is 73, and because of this long delay, he's dependent on food bank vouchers, but is now in imminent threat of homelessness because his housing benefit is contingent on his pension credit.
I'd like to thank the honourable member for her point of order and giving me forward notice of it. Clearly, this is a very, very urgent matter. It's right that it should be addressed in this way, and I do hope that the whip on the Treasury bench will ensure that the Minister gets to hear this and action can be taken as quickly as possible. Point of order, Kim Johnson.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I would like to apologise unreservedly for the intemperate language that I used during PMQs. I was wrong to use the term fascist in relation to the Israeli government and understand why this was particularly insensitive given the history of the State of Israel. And while there are far-right elements in the government, I recognise that the use of the term in this context was wrong. I would also like to apologise for the use of the term apartheid state. While I was quoting accurately Amnesty's description, I recognise this is insensitive and I'd like to withdraw it.
I'd like to thank the Honourable Lady for her point of order, and it now stands on the record. Point of order, Martin Doherty-Hughes.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. An essential part of being a member of this House is to represent and support our constituents when they approach us for assistance. And members on all sides will, of course, engage with the UK VI, or hope to, on a regular basis through what I know is called the MP Engagement Team. I and my team have been seeking to engage with the MP Engagement Team since September 2022 without a single response. I wonder, Mr Deputy Speaker, given that it is my duty and other members across here's duty to support our constituents when it comes to our engagement with UK VI, what you would advise me, on behalf of my constituents and other members, what to do when we have an utter lack of engagement from UK VI's MP Engagement Team.
To thank the honourable member for his point of order and the forward notice of it. Clearly, there again, an incredibly important point that he has made, and we do expect that when we contact these government agencies that they respond in a very timely manner, and this clearly hasn't happened in that case. And there again, I would ask the whip on the Treasury bench to ensure that the department gets to hear of this. Point of order, Stephen Crabb.
Deputy Speaker, and further to the point of order from the Honourable Lady, I'd like to thank her for making that statement. But, Mr Deputy Speaker, my understanding is that the use of language like apartheid, fascist, isn't just insensitive, it's actually a breach of the international IRA definition of anti-Semitism. So what advice would you and the Speaker's office be providing to leaders of all the parties in this House about the language that we use here and the importance of tackling deep-rooted anti-Semitism in our political culture, which at this point in time is so evident on the left of politics, Mr Deputy Speaker? Because it's less than a week ago, Mr Deputy Speaker, you sat in that chair when we were here for the annual debate on Holocaust Memorial Day. You ended that debate, Mr Deputy Speaker, with very powerful words yourself. It is incumbent upon us to really tackle this deep-seated problem, is it not?
I'd like to thank the honourable member for his point of order as well. And Mr Speaker has made it absolutely clear on several occasions that temperate language should be used throughout in this chamber, and there are very good reasons for that. So thank you once again. We're now going to come to the presentation of Bill in the name of Secretary Gillian Keegan.
Formally.
Lifelong Learning Higher Education Fee Limits Bill.
Second reading what day?
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow. We now come to the 10-minute rule motion on Scotland's self-determination, and I call Neil Hanvey.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to amend the Scotland 1998 Act to transfer the power to legislate for a Scottish independence referendum to the Scottish Parliament, to provide that such power may only be exercised where the Scottish public has demonstrated its support for the holding of such a referendum, to provide that no such referendum may be held sooner than 7 years following any previous such referendum, and for connected purposes. The question of whether the ancient nation of Scotland should be an independent country once more continues to be the subject of much debate, indicating that the matter is far from settled. Of course, it's entirely proper for any country to review such matters, because Scotland will only become independent as and when the majority of people of Scotland choose that path. Yet this requires a democratic mechanism that is constitutional and satisfies international legal precedent. This bill seeks to standardise and codify such a requirement in line with the motion passed by this House, which endorsed the principles of the 1989 Claim of Right, which acknowledged the sovereign right of the Scottish people to determine the form of government best suited to their needs. This bill is explicit on the necessary conditions to bring this mechanism into play. Firstly, that the power to legislate for a referendum requires a democratic mandate from the Scottish public to do so. Since 2014, that criterion has been met in successive general elections to the Scottish Parliament, most recently in 2021, where a majority of MSPs were elected on a manifesto commitment to deliver an independence referendum. In addition to this, a majority of the votes cast on the Dahont regional list were won by parties that support independence, the SNP, the Scottish Green Party and the Alapa Party. Secondly, this bill states that no such referendum may be held sooner than 7 years after any previous such referendum. In terms of established UK precedent, this would bring Scotland into line with the provisions for a border poll in Northern Ireland regarding the constitutional future of the island of Ireland. And as Robert McCorquodale, Professor of International Law and Human Rights, sets out, this would be in keeping with the UK's international legal obligations applicable to all states, including to peoples within states worldwide, to seek to exercise their right to self-determination. Mr. Speaker, it is necessary to put this bill into its political and historical context. In 1707, a majority of the Scottish parliamentarians may have been persuaded, but the people were never consulted. The Acts of Union 1707 between England and Scotland created the Kingdom of Great Britain, establishing a single political entity, yet preserving the territorial, legal and institutional integrity of each partner country. The UK's constitution is not codified in a single document, so the question of whether the Acts of Union can unilaterally be dissolved by one party is not clear. However, the accepted position hitherto is that the Union is a voluntary association of equal partners, and Scotland has an unquestioned right of self-determination. And that is a right underpinned by Scots common law, which rests not on the Magna Carta, but on the Claim of Right, which continues to assert that it is the people who are sovereign in Scotland. The Scotland Act of 1998 established the Scottish Parliament, which has the power to legislate on agreed devolved matters within Scotland, while the UK Parliament retains legislative competency on matters reserved to Westminster. It is generally understood that for a country to gain independence, there requires to be a legal process, such as a vote in a referendum. Such a process was established in 2012 through the Edinburgh Agreement, which was signed by First Minister Alex Salmond and Prime Minister David Cameron. The Edinburgh Agreement established a clear process whereby a Scottish general election that returned a government with a mandate for an independence referendum would enable that government to petition for authority under Section 30 of the Scotland Act to respect the democratic force of that vote in a referendum. While respect for this established process has since been affirmed by the UK Government, in absence of any legal constitutional consensus, the matter of Scottish independence has reached a political impasse to the detriment of Scotland's democratic process. This bill seeks to remedy that by setting out the process by which the democratic wishes of the people of Scotland can be respected and enacted. This would preserve their inalienable human rights as a distinct people of the ancient nation of Scotland, in accordance with the constitutional tradition of Scotland, the UN Charter and extant international law. Scotland's distinct constitutional tradition is best expressed by Lord Cooper in the case of McCormick versus Lord Advocate. The principle of the unlimited sovereignty of Parliament is a distinctively English principle, which has no counterpart in Scottish constitutional law. And in the pleadings of the Honourable and Learned Member for Edinburgh South West in her prorogation case to the UK Supreme Court, it is noted that the 1707 parliamentary union between England and Wales may have created a new state, but it did not create one nation. The UK government enthusiastically claims it seeks to preserve democracy the world over, yet it has moved to block Scotland's consistently expressed democratic aspirations at each and every turn. Surely it's now time to move to eliminate accusations and counter-accusations of brinkmanship and set out a clear pathway consistent with the precedent across these islands where constitutional friction exists. Can members opposite imagine the circumstances where, having entered the common market and ratified every subsequent treaty leading to the European Union, the EU Parliament moved to block or interfere with their Brexit vote, or set a limit on when and if such a vote should be held? The notion is, of course, ludicrous, because democracy is not a single event, but an evolving and continuous process. That is how civilised people and fundamental rights of freedom of thought and expression are peacefully demonstrated. As a member of the EU, the UK government possessed and exercised a veto, yet claimed its sovereignty was impeded by membership. Scotland has no such equivalent mechanism available to our people and remains subject to the wiles of our larger neighbour, exemplified by Brexit. How does that constitute access to meaningful political process as claimed in the recent UK Supreme Court judgment? Prime Minister Winston Churchill, signing of the 1941 Atlantic Charter, brought into being the principle of self-determination of peoples as now enshrined in the UN Charter. Margaret Thatcher in her memoir said of Scotland, as a nation, they have an undoubted right to national self-determination. John Major, when Prime Minister, said of Scotland, no nation could be held irrevocably in a union against its will. None of these senior Conservative politicians sought to constrain the democratic right to self-determination. In the aftermath of the 2014 referendum, the All-Party Smith Commission agreement was signed by all of Scotland's main political parties, and it stated, "It is agreed that nothing in this report prevents Scotland becoming an independent country in the future should the people of Scotland so choose." The effect of this bill should be uncontroversial for every member. It merely establishes in law an equivalent mechanism to the principle already conceded by the UK government in relation to a border poll in Northern Ireland, that no such referendum may be held sooner than 7 years after any previously mandated referendum. In 1889, in this place, the equality of UK partner countries was asserted by one William Ewart Gladstone MP, saying, "I am to suppose a case in which Scotland unanimously or by a clearly preponderating voice were to make the demand on the United Parliament to be treated not only on the same principle but in the same manner as Ireland. I could not deny the title of Scotland to urge such a claim." This begs the question, why would the UK government deny democracy to Scotland but not to Northern Ireland? Could the clue lie in the words of former Prime Minister John Major from 1993's Downing Street Declaration, that the UK has no selfish strategic or economic interest in Northern Ireland, whereas in the case of Scotland, the opposite is true, where with unconstrained access to our vast resources, energy is transmitted south to millions at no cost. Mr. Speaker, the decision on Scotland's future ultimately and rightly must rest in the hands of the people of Scotland and in the constitutional tradition of popular sovereignty in our great country. It is the people who remain sovereign. This bill is neutral in its effect. It favours neither one side or the other, but it seeks to codify the Scottish people's right to choose their own constitutional future. To return to 1889, Dr Gavin Clark, MP for Caithness, said on the matter, "Everybody, even old Tories on the other side, must admit that some change is necessary. When what is the remedy to be? If democracy matters at all, every member in this House should support the remedy contained in this bill, regardless of their view on Scottish independence, and I commend it to the House."
This would be a time when, if anybody wishes to oppose the 10-minute rule motion, that they should indicate now. They haven't done so, so I am now going to put the question. And the question is that the honourable member have leave to bring in the bill? As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who will prepare and bring in the bill?
Kenny McCaskill, Joanna Cherry, Angus Brendan McNeill, Douglas Chapman, Margaret Ferrier and myself.
Mr Neil Hanby.
Thank you. Scotland Self-Determination Bill.
Second reading what day?
23rd of March 2023.
23rd of March 2023.
Oh, sorry, 24th of March 2023.
We'll have to wait a day later. 24th of March 2023. Thank you very much. Thank you. We now move to the programme motion. Minister to move.
I beg to move.
The question is the UK Infrastructure Bank Bill Programme number 2 motion as on the order paper.
What distinguishes Broadcasting Scotland from a website or blog, apart from our brilliant programmes?
Hi there, I'm Gordon Ross.
Are the costs we face to enable us to produce those programmes. These costs are significant and ongoing. However, our facilities are able to do so much more if only we had the staff. In the last year, some of our supporters have cancelled their subscriptions. In one way, we would prefer it if it was because they didn't like us, rather than it being because of the financial pressures which we are all under because of COVID. The really positive outcome of our fundraiser is that at a time of economic challenge in Scotland, we will use your donations to create jobs and in a small way contribute to improving the Scottish economy. If you want us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster, able to provide an alternative mainstream television platform, then please support us.
Scotland is going to be an independent country.
Just imagine what we could do if we had even 1% of the BBC Scotland channel's budget. Imagine. And then please consider turning your imagination into reality. Please support us if you can afford it.